Tonight we will explore the ancient truth of karma, not as an abstract idea, not as something distant or philosophical, but as a living force woven into every choice we make, every action we take, every word we speak into the world. Karma is not punishment. It is not revenge. It is simply this, that every action carries consequences. Like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples move outward in every direction, touching shores we cannot see. And eventually, those ripples return to the place where the stone was dropped. The Buddha taught this with great patience and great clarity. He said that our actions are our true belongings. We cannot escape them. We cannot hide from them. They follow us like shadows in the sun. Tonight, through a series of stories, we will watch these ripples move. We will see how greed, deception, cruelty, and carelessness send waves of harm into the world. And we will see, with quiet eyes and open hearts, how those same waves return to the one who set them in motion. These are not stories of vengeance. They are stories of natural law, as natural as gravity, as certain as the turning of seasons, as unavoidable as the breath you are taking right now. If this path calls to you, if these stories bring you peace and wisdom as you rest, I invite you to subscribe and return to this place whenever you need its shelter. There is nothing you need to do tonight, nothing to fix, no problem to solve, no one you need to become. You are here, and that is enough. Your body is supported. Your breath moves without effort. The day is complete, and you have nothing left to carry. Let your eyes close if they haven't already. Feel the weight of your body settling downward, like sand sinking gently through warm water. Let your jaw soften. Let your shoulders release. Let your hands rest open and still. Let us begin this journey together. Take a slow breath in, hold it gently for a moment, and let it go. Feel how your body softens with each exhale, how the world grows quieter, how the space around you becomes safe, warm, and still. Our first story takes us to a merchant's road, dusty and long, winding through forests that once thundered with the footsteps of elephants. There once lived a merchant named Ratan. He was a broad-shouldered man with sharp eyes and a quick smile, the kind of smile that made you believe whatever he was selling. He lived in a prosperous town on the edge of a great forest, a town known for its trade in precious goods, silk, spices, carved wood, and ivory. It was ivory that had made Ratan wealthy. He had begun as a young man carrying bundles for other merchants, sleeping on the floors of warehouses, eating rice and dal from a tin bowl. He watched the ivory traders carefully. He saw how they moved, how they spoke, how they counted their coins at the end of each day. And he learned, by the time he was 30, Ratan had his own warehouse. By 35, he had 3. He employed hunters who went deep into the forest and returned with tusks wrapped in oiled cloth. He employed carvers who turned those tusks into ornaments, combs, handles for ceremonial knives, and delicate figurines that wealthy families placed on their shelves. His hands were always clean. He never entered the forest himself. He never saw the elephants fall. He never heard their cries or watched the light leave their enormous, knowing eyes. He only saw the ivory, smooth and white and valuable, arriving at his warehouse doors. But Ratan knew that what he did was not entirely within the law. The forests belonged to the kingdom, and the elephants within them were protected, at least in principle, by royal decree. Hunting was permitted only in certain seasons, only in certain numbers. Ratan exceeded those numbers every year, every season. He managed this through a simple method. He paid the forest guards. Each month, a pouch of silver coins found its way to the chief guard's home. Another pouch went to the regional magistrate. A third went to the keeper of records, who adjusted the hunting tallies so that everything appeared proper on paper. It was efficient, it was quiet, and it had worked for years. Ratan told himself that the elephants were abundant. The forest was vast. There would always be more. He told himself that he provided employment, that his carvers fed their families because of him, that the beautiful objects he sold brought joy to people across many kingdoms. He told himself many things, and for a long time, the world seemed to agree with him. His son, Dhruv, grew tall and strong. His warehouse expanded. His reputation among traders was excellent. He was invited to festivals and ceremonies. He donated generously to temples. People spoke his name with respect. But deep in the forest, something was changing. The elephants were growing fewer. Where once great herds moved along ancient paths, now small groups wandered nervously. Their numbers thinned, their routes disrupted. The old matriarchs remembered paths that led to water, to salt licks, to the deep groves where they had always found food. But now those paths were blocked by new settlements, by cleared land, by the absence of the companions who had walked beside them. The elephants grew hungry. They grew desperate. Ratan heard reports from his hunters. The elephants were harder to find. They had to go deeper, stay longer, take greater risks. Sometimes they returned empty-handed. Sometimes they did not return at all. One evening, Ratan sat on the upper balcony of his home, watching the sun set over the town. His son Dhruv sat beside him, a young man of 19 now, already learning the trade, already counting coins with the same quick fingers his father had. "The hunters say the forest is emptying," Dhruv said. Ratan waved his hand. "Hunters always complain. It makes them feel important. The forest stretches for 100 miles. There are always more elephants." "But what if there aren't?" Ratan looked at his son. "Then we find new forests. There is always somewhere else. The world is large, Dhruv. A merchant's skill is knowing where to look next." Dhruv nodded slowly, but said nothing more. He watched the last light fade from the sky, and something in his face suggested he was not entirely convinced. "Let us pause here for a moment. Feel your breath moving gently, in and out, like a tide on a quiet shore. There is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to decide. Simply rest here, in this space between words, and let your body grow heavier, softer, more still." The story of Ratan continues. That year, the elephants began to leave the deep forest. It began with small incidents. A farmer on the forest's edge found his banana grove destroyed overnight. The trees snapped and trampled, the fruit taken. Another farmer lost his rice paddy, the young plants crushed into mud by enormous feet. A well was fouled. A fence was demolished. A grain store was broken open and emptied. The villagers who lived along the forest boundary had always lived alongside elephants. There had always been occasional encounters, a trampled field here, a broken fence there. But this was different. This was sustained. This was desperate. The elephants were starving. Their forest home, thinned of its great trees, its undergrowth grazed bare by too many mouths competing for too little, could no longer sustain them. The ancient paths to food and water had been disrupted. The herds, already diminished by years of hunting, were now fragmenting further, small groups splitting off in search of anything to eat. They found the villages. Ratan heard these reports with irritation rather than concern. Crop damage was a farmer's problem, not a merchant's. He was busy with a large order from a distant kingdom, a commission for ivory panels to decorate a royal chamber. It was the most valuable order he had ever received. He pushed his hunters harder. He needed 6 more tusks of the highest quality. He doubled the bribes to the forest guards. He sent his most experienced men into the deepest parts of the remaining forest. 3 of them did not come back. Word reached Ratan that the elephants had become aggressive. A bull elephant had charged a hunting party, scattering them into the trees. 1 man had been trampled. Another had fallen from a cliff while fleeing. The 3rd had simply disappeared. Ratan's chief hunter, a wiry man named Gopal, came to him with fear in his eyes. "We should stop," Gopal said. "Something has changed. The elephants know us now. They know what we are. They are not afraid anymore. They are angry." "Elephants do not get angry," Ratan said. "They are animals." "Then you have never looked one in the eye," Gopal replied quietly. "I have. And what I saw there was not the blankness of an animal. It was recognition. It was memory." Ratan dismissed him. He found new hunters, younger men, hungrier, less cautious, more willing to take risks for the coins Ratan offered. They went into the forest with ropes and spears and poison-tipped arrows. Some of them brought back ivory. The raids on the villages grew worse. Now the elephants came not just for crops, but seemed driven by something deeper than hunger. They pushed through walls. They overturned carts. They stood in the middle of roads and would not move. At night, villagers heard them calling to each other across the darkness. Long, low sounds that carried for miles. Sounds that seemed to vibrate in the chest and settle in the bones. The village elders sent a delegation to the town, asking for help. They came to Ratan, among others, because he was known as a man of influence. Ratan listened to them in his reception hall, sitting on cushions while they stood before him, their clothes dusty from the road, their faces lined with worry. "The elephants have become a danger," the eldest of them said. "We need trenches dug along the forest edge. We need watchfires maintained through the night. We need compensation for the crops we have lost." "This is a matter for the magistrate," Ratan said smoothly. "I am merely a merchant." "You are a merchant who trades in ivory," the elder said, and his eyes were steady. "We know where the ivory comes from, Ratan. We have always known." The room was very quiet for a moment. "The elephants are desperate because they are being hunted beyond what the forest can bear," the elder continued. "They come to our villages because they have nowhere else to go. Their fear has become our fear. Their suffering has become our suffering." Ratan's smile did not change, but something behind it shifted. A tightness in his jaw, a stillness in his eyes. "I sympathize with your situation," he said carefully. "I will speak to the magistrate on your behalf." The delegation left. Ratan did not speak to the magistrate. He had a shipment to prepare. "Take a gentle breath now. Let it fill your chest slowly, like water filling a cup, and release it. Feel how your body responds to the letting go, how it sinks a little deeper, how the muscles in your face soften, how the space behind your eyes grows dark and warm and quiet. There is nowhere else to be, only here, only now, only this gentle breathing, this soft darkness, this story unfolding like a path through the trees." The rains came early that year. Heavy gray curtains of water fell from skies that seemed to have no end. The roads turned to mud. The rivers swelled. The forest steamed and dripped and grew dense with new green growth that was not enough, not nearly enough, to feed what remained of the elephant herds. Ratan's warehouse was full. tusks lay in rows on wooden racks, wrapped in cloth, sorted by size and quality. His carvers worked in the rooms behind the warehouse, their tools moving carefully over the smooth white surface of the ivory, bringing forth the shapes that wealthy buyers desired. Flowers, animals, scenes from mythology, delicate combs with teeth so fine they seemed impossible. The ivory panels for the royal commission were nearly complete. They were magnificent. Even Rattan, who had handled ivory for 20 years and had lost whatever wonder it once held for him, paused sometimes to look at them. The carving was extraordinary. Elephants walking in procession, their trunks raised, their ears spread wide, their great bodies rendered in the very material that had been taken from them. There was something terrible in that beauty, though Rattan did not see it. His son Dhruv worked in the warehouse most days, overseeing the inventory, managing the carvers, checking the quality of finished pieces. He was good at it. He had his father's eye for value and his mother's patience with craftsmen. But lately, he had been quieter than usual. One evening, as the rain drummed on the roof and the lanterns cast warm circles of light across the stacked ivory, Dhruv came to his father's office. "I spoke with a monk today," he said, "a traveling teacher who was sheltering from the rain in the market." "And what wisdom did this monk share?" Rattan asked, not looking up from his ledger. "He spoke about karma." Rattan set down his pen. "Monks always speak about karma. It is their profession, as ivory is mine." He said that every action has a consequence that cannot be avoided. That harm done to any living being returns to the one who caused it, not as punishment, but as natural law, like water flowing downhill, like fire rising upward. "Philosophy," Rattan said. "Beautiful, but impractical." "He said something else," Dhruv continued. "He said that when we destroy the home of any creature, we destroy our own safety, that we are connected to every living thing by threads we cannot see, and when we cut those threads, we cut the net that holds us." Rattan looked at his son for a long moment. The rain filled the silence between them. "Dhruv," he said, and his voice was gentle but firm, "I have built everything we have with these hands. This warehouse, this business, your future. I did not do it by listening to monks in the rain. I did it by understanding how the world works. The world works on trade, on supply and demand, on the willingness to do what others will not. But the elephants are animals, son. They exist as part of the natural world, and the natural world provides for those who know how to use it. This has been true since the beginning of time." Dhruv was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The old village elder said the elephants remember." "Remember what?" "Everything." He said elephants remember the paths their grandmothers walked. They remember where their family members died. They remember the faces of those who harmed them. Rattan picked up his pen again. "Then they have something in common with merchants. We also remember everything, especially who owes us money." He smiled at his own joke. Dhruv did not smile. He left the office and walked through the warehouse, past the rows of ivory, past the carvers bent over their work, past the panels showing elephants in procession. He paused at the great wooden doors of the warehouse, looking out at the rain. Something in him was uneasy, something that had no name and no clear shape, but that sat in his chest like a stone in water, heavy and still and impossible to ignore. He could not have known that he had 17 days left to live. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel the weight of your blanket or your covers. Feel how they hold you gently. Feel the surface beneath you, solid and supportive. You are safe here. You are held. Take a breath. Let it come naturally. Do not force it. Simply notice it arriving, filling you, and then leaving. Arriving and leaving, like waves on a shore, like light moving through clouds, like the steady, patient rhythm that has carried you through every moment of your life. Let your thoughts soften. If they come, let them pass. They are clouds. You are the sky. They are ripples. You are the water beneath. They are leaves on a river. You are the river itself, deep and still and flowing. The story continues, but there is no hurry. We have all the time we need. It was on a night of no moon that the elephants came to town. They had been growing bolder for weeks. The raids on outlying villages had escalated. Fences meant nothing to them. Ditches meant nothing. Even the watchfires that the villagers maintained through the night seemed only to illuminate the massive gray shapes as they moved through the darkness, eating what they could find, destroying what stood in their way. But they had never come to the town itself. The town was larger, noisier, brighter. It had stone walls in some places and busy streets, and the smell of many humans packed together. The elephants had always turned back at its edges, retreating into the darkness of the fields and the forest beyond. Not this night. Ratan was woken by a sound he had never heard before. It was not the trumpeting call that elephants make when excited or alarmed. It was lower than that, deeper. A rumbling that he felt in his ribcage before he heard it with his ears. It seemed to come from the earth itself, as if the ground were speaking. He went to his window. The street below was dark, lit only by a few oil lamps hung from doorways. At first, he saw nothing. Then a shape moved at the end of the street. A shape so large that his mind refused to understand it. It was like watching a building shift and begin to walk. Then another shape behind it, and another. 3 elephants, moving through the streets of the town in the dead of night. They moved with a deliberateness that was more frightening than speed. Each step was placed with care. Each movement of their great heads was slow and measured. They seemed to know exactly where they were going. Ratan watched them pass beneath his window. He could see the texture of their skin in the lamplight, the deep wrinkles, the sparse, coarse hairs, the mud dried in the folds of their legs. He could see their eyes, small for their enormous heads, but gleaming with a dark intelligence that made his breath stop. One of them paused. It turned its head and looked up at his window. Ratan stepped back from the glass. His heart was hammering. The elephant regarded the window for a long moment, its trunk lifting slightly, tasting the air. Then it turned and continued down the street. They were heading toward the market district, toward the warehouses. Ratan threw on his clothes and ran downstairs. His wife called after him, but he did not stop. He ran through the courtyard, through the gate, into the street. His son Dhruv was already there, standing in the doorway of the house, staring in the direction the elephants had gone. "Stay here," Ratan said. "Father, no. Let them go. Let them take what they want. It is only goods, only ivory." "It is everything I have built," Ratan said, and he was already running. Dhruv ran after him. The streets were chaos now. Other people had been woken by the sounds. Doors were opening. Voices were calling. Someone was shouting about elephants in the town, which seemed impossible, which seemed like a dream. But the evidence was there in the cracked paving stones, the overturned cart, the deep round prints in the mud of the street, each one as wide as a barrel. Ratan reached the market district. He could hear them now. The sound of wood splintering, the groan of a wall giving way, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. He turned the corner and saw his warehouse. The main doors had been pushed inward. They lay flat on the floor, their heavy iron hinges twisted like thread. Inside, a shape moved in the darkness. He could hear the crash of the ivory racks being overturned, the crack of tusks hitting the stone floor, the sound of systematic, thorough destruction. There were 2 elephants inside the warehouse. A third stood at the entrance, like a sentry, its massive body blocking the doorway, its head moving slowly from side to side. Ratan stood in the street, watching everything he had built being dismantled by the very creatures whose bodies had built it. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He moved toward the warehouse. He did not think about what he would do. He simply could not stand still. Something in him refused to accept what was happening, refused to let go, refused to step back and allow the natural consequence of 20 years of taking to arrive at his door. The sentry elephant saw him. It raised its trunk and made a sound, a blast of air and anger that echoed off the stone buildings and rattled the shutters of every window on the street. Ratan stopped. Behind him, running footsteps. "Dhruv. Father, come away. Come away now." Ratan did not move. He stood in the middle of the street, staring at the elephant, and the elephant stared back. For a moment that seemed to stretch beyond time, they regarded each other, the merchant and the beast, the taker and the taken from, 2 beings caught in a web of cause and effect that neither had fully chosen but both were bound by. Then the elephant charged. It moved with a speed that seemed impossible for something so large. The ground shook, the air split. Ratan could not move. His body had turned to stone. His legs would not obey him. He stood frozen as 20 years of karma bore down on him like a gray wall of muscle and bone and memory. Dhruv pushed his father aside. The impact was a sound that Ratan would hear for the rest of his life. A sound he would hear in every silence, in every quiet moment, in every breath he took, until breath itself was taken from him. It was the sound of his son's body meeting an unstoppable force. It was brief. It was final. Ratan lay in the mud of the street where he had fallen. The elephant stood over Dhruv's body for a moment, then turned and walked back to the warehouse. It did not look at Ratan again. By morning, the elephants were gone. They had vanished back into what remained of the forest, leaving behind them a trail of destruction that wound through the market district like a scar. Ratan's warehouse was a ruin. The ivory was scattered and broken. The royal commission panels, those magnificent carvings of elephants in procession, had been trampled into dust, and Dhruv lay wrapped in white cloth on the floor of his father's house, his face peaceful, as if he had simply fallen asleep. The town mourned. The town was angry. The town demanded that something be done about the elephants. There was talk of organized hunts, of poison, of digging pits along the forest edge, of burning the forest itself to drive the animals out. Into this storm of grief and anger came a traveling teacher. He was not a grand figure. He wore simple robes, faded by sun and time. His feet were bare and dusty. His head was shaved, and his face was lined with years of walking, of sitting, of watching. He carried nothing but a wooden bowl and a cloth bag slung over one shoulder. He was the same monk that Dhruv had spoken to in the rain weeks before. He had heard what had happened, and he had come. He found Ratan sitting in the ruins of his warehouse, surrounded by broken ivory. The merchant's eyes were red but dry. He had passed beyond tears into a place that was harder and more empty than grief. He sat with his hands hanging between his knees, staring at nothing. The monk sat down beside him. Not close, not far, just present. For a long time, neither spoke. The morning light filtered through the broken roof, falling in columns of gold that illuminated the dust and debris. Somewhere outside, birds were singing, life continuing, indifferent to loss. "My son spoke with you," Ratan said finally. His voice was hoarse. "He told me about karma, about threads connecting all living things, about harm returning to the one who caused it." "Yes," the monk said. "I thought it was philosophy, beautiful, but impractical. And now?" Ratan looked at the broken tusks scattered around him, white fragments on the stone floor, teeth torn from mouths, bones of the face. He saw them now for what they were, in a way he never had before. Not trade goods, not inventory, not wealth. They were parts of living beings. They were the remains of creatures who had families, who remembered paths their grandmothers walked, who mourned their dead, who called to each other across great distances in the night. "I took from them for 20 years, Ratan said, "and last night they took from me in a single hour." The monk was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "You profited from their death. They collected the debt from your life." The words fell into Ratan like stones into deep water. They sank and kept sinking, finding no bottom, just deeper and deeper layers of truth. "It was not revenge," the monk continued gently. "Elephants do not calculate revenge as humans do. What happened was simpler and more terrible than that. You destroyed their world. You took their families. You drove them from their homes. And when they had nothing left, when desperation consumed them, they moved through yours as you had moved through theirs. Not with malice, with hunger, with confusion, with the desperate energy of creatures pushed beyond all natural limits." "My son tried to tell me," Ratan whispered. "Your son saw clearly what you could not. He stood between you and the consequence. That is what love does. It steps into the path of karma and says, 'Here, let me carry this.'" Ratan bent forward, his forehead touching the broken ivory on the floor. The sound that came from him was not weeping. It was something deeper, something that came from the very center of his body, from the place where self-deception had lived for 20 years and was now being torn out by the roots. The monk placed his hand on Ratan's back, just rested it there, warm and still. This story shows us how karma operates not as divine punishment, but as natural consequence. Ratan discovered that destroying animal populations for profit does not remove those animals from the web of cause and effect. It transforms them. It turns abundance into scarcity, peace into desperation, coexistence into collision. The Buddha taught that all beings are interconnected, that harm done to any part of the living world ripples outward and returns. This is called the law of dependent origination, pratyasamutpada in Sanskrit, which means that nothing exists in isolation. Everything arises in dependence upon causes and conditions. When we alter those conditions through greed, when we destroy the balance that sustains life, the consequences do not remain distant. They come home. When we take without restraint from the world around us, we are not simply using resources. We are pulling threads from the net that holds us all. And eventually, the net tears, and we fall through. Let us pause here now. Take a slow breath. Let it fill you gently. Feel the air as it enters, cool and clean. Feel it as it leaves, warm and soft. Your body knows how to breathe. Trust it. Let it do this one thing for you without effort, without thought, without control. Feel your hands. Are they tense? Let them soften. Feel your jaw. Is it clenched? Let it release. Feel your forehead. Is it furrowed? Let it smooth. You are resting now. The story of Ratan is complete, and its weight does not need to be carried. Let it settle like sediment in still water. Let the teaching sink gently to the bottom, where it will rest and do its quiet work. There is another story waiting, A different story, with different characters and different choices, but the same invisible thread of cause and effect running through it like a river through a valley. Let us explore it now. There once lived a landlord named Vikram. He was a tall man, thin as a fence post and nearly as rigid. He dressed well, in clothes that were always clean and pressed, even in the heat of planting season when everyone else was streaked with mud and sweat. He wore his wealth like a second skin, and it fit him so well that people sometimes forgot he had not always had it. Vikram's father had been a farmer, a good one, a man who understood the soil as intimately as he understood his own body, who could tell by the smell of the wind whether rain was coming, who could feel the readiness of the earth through the soles of his bare feet. He had worked a small piece of land and worked it well, and over the years he had saved enough to buy the plots on either side of his, and then the plots beyond those. When the old man died, Vikram inherited 300 acres of the finest farmland in the valley, rich, dark soil watered by a river that never ran dry, land that could grow anything, land that, in the right hands, could feed hundreds. Vikram did not want to feed hundreds. He wanted to be wealthy. There is a difference, though it is not always easy to see from the outside. He decided that the most efficient way to farm 300 acres was not to farm them himself. He would lease plots to tenant farmers who would work the land and pay him a portion of each harvest. This was a common arrangement, one that could benefit everyone when managed fairly. Vikram did not manage it fairly. His tenants were poor families who had no land of their own. They came to him with calloused hands and hopeful eyes, and he gave them plots to work and homes to live in, and in exchange they owed him half their harvest and 6 days of labor each month on his personal fields. 6 days of labor each month on his personal fields, in addition to working their own leased plots, in addition to feeding their families, maintaining their homes, tending their animals. It was a heavy burden, but the tenants accepted it because they had no choice. Land was scarce, landlords were few, and Vikram's soil was the best in the valley. If you could not farm here, where could you farm? For several years the arrangement held. The tenants worked their plots and Vikram's plots. They rose before dawn and worked until dark. Their children helped in the fields as soon as they were old enough to carry a water jug. Their wives planted and weeded and harvested alongside them. It was exhausting, but it was life, and they knew no other. Then Vikram changed the terms. It happened in the spring, just as the planting season began. This is the most critical time in a farmer's year. The soil must be prepared. The seeds must go in at exactly the right moment. The water channels must be cleared and directed. A delay of even a few days can mean the difference between a full harvest and a failed one. Vikram called his tenants together in the courtyard of his large stone house. They came with their hats in their hands, standing in the sun while Vikram stood in the shade of his portico. "This year," he said, "I am expanding my personal fields. I am planting indigo for the dye market. The prices are excellent and the crop requires intensive labor at planting. I will need each of you for 15 days this month, not 6. A murmur went through the crowd. 15 days during planting season. That would leave them only 15 days to plant their own crops, and some of those days would be lost to rest, to rain, to the simple necessities of living. An older farmer named Bhaskar stepped forward. He was a quiet man, respected by the others, a man who chose his words the way a carpenter chooses his cuts, carefully and with purpose. "Vikramji," he said, using the respectful form of address. 15 days during planting will not leave us enough time for our own fields. Our crops will go in late. Late planting means poor harvest. Poor harvest means we cannot feed our families or pay you what we owe. Then you will need to work faster, Vikram said. A seed does not grow faster because a landlord wishes it, Bhaskar replied gently. Something hardened in Vikram's face. He was not accustomed to being contradicted, even gently, even respectfully, even with truth. The terms of your lease allow me to require labor as needed, he said. I am requiring it. Those who fulfill their obligations may continue to farm my land. Those who do not will be asked to leave. Asked to leave. It was a polite way of saying evicted, put out of their homes, sent onto the road with whatever they could carry, in a valley where there was no other land to farm, no other work to do, no other place to go. The tenants looked at each other. They looked at the ground. They looked at their calloused hands. They had no choice. Let us rest here for a moment. Notice your breath. It has continued all this time, steady and faithful, without you needing to direct it. It has carried you through these stories like a current carries a leaf, gently, persistently, with a patience that asks nothing in return. Feel the softness of this moment, the darkness behind your closed eyes, the warmth of your body, the quietness that surrounds you like water surrounds a stone at the bottom of a stream, smooth, complete, still. You are safe here, you are held. And the story of Vikram will continue, but for now, there is only this breath, this moment, this gentle resting in the space between words. The tenants worked Vikram's indigo fields for 15 days that month. They bent over the rows in the hot sun, pressing the tiny seeds into the dark earth, directing water through the channels, pulling weeds that sprang up almost as fast as they could be removed. Indigo is a demanding crop. It drinks water greedily. It requires constant attention, and it must be planted at precisely the right time, in precisely the right way, or it will not yield the deep blue dye that makes it valuable. While the tenants worked Vikram's fields, their own plots waited. The soil dried. The window for planting narrowed. The rains that should have met freshly planted seeds instead fell on bare earth, washing nutrients downhill, compacting the surface into a hard crust that would need to be broken again before anything could grow. When the 15 days were done, the tenants rushed to their own fields. They worked frantically, planting late, cutting corners they had never cut before. Bhaskar, the older farmer, worked from before dawn until long after dark, his wife and children beside him, all of them moving through the rows with the desperate efficiency of people who know that time is running out. The crops went in late, every one of them. Across all of Vikram's 300 acres, every tenant's personal crop was planted 10 to 14 days behind the natural schedule. It does not sound like much. In the language of merchants and landlords, 2 weeks is nothing. A minor delay, an inconvenience. In the language of soil and seed and rain, 2 weeks is everything. The monsoon arrived on time, as it always did, indifferent to human arrangements. The rains fell on Vikram's indigo, which had been planted at the perfect moment and was already established, its roots gripping the earth, its leaves unfurling to drink. The indigo thrived. The rains fell on the tenants' crops, which were still young, still fragile, still struggling to establish themselves in soil that had been neglected during the critical window. The young rice shoots, barely rooted, were battered by the heavy rains. The vegetable seedlings, not yet strong enough to stand on their own, were bent and broken. The lentil plants, which needed dry feed in their early weeks, sat in waterlogged soil and began to rot from the roots up. Bhaskar watched his rice paddy flood. The water rose over the tender shoots, not the controlled flooding that rice needs at the right stage of growth, but a drowning. Too much water, too soon, for plants too young to survive it. He stood at the edge of his field in the rain, water streaming down his face, and he felt something break inside him. Not dramatically, not with a sound, just a quiet giving way, like a thread pulled too tight for too long, finally snapping. His harvest that year was less than a third of what it should have been. All the tenants suffered the same. Some lost half their crop. Some lost more. The grain stores that should have been full by autumn were barely a quarter filled. The families looked at what they had and began to calculate. How many months of food? How much to set aside for seed? How much they owed Vikram? Because Vikram still expected his half. They came to him again, standing in the courtyard of his stone house. This time Bhaskar did not step forward alone. They came as a group, their faces drawn, their bodies thinner than they had been in spring. "The harvest has failed," Bhaskar said. "Not from laziness, not from neglect, but because we were in your fields when we should have been in our own. We cannot give you half of what we have. If we do, our children will starve before spring." Vikram stood in his usual place in the shade of the portico. His indigo harvest had been excellent. The dye merchants had paid handsomely. He had more wealth this year than any year before. He could feel it like a warm current running beneath his skin, the satisfaction of a plan that had worked exactly as intended. "A contract is a contract," he said. "You agreed to the terms." "We agreed to terms that would allow us to live," Bhaskar replied. "These terms do not allow us to live." "Then perhaps you should have worked more efficiently." Bhaskar looked at Vikram for a long time. The other tenants watched. The sun moved behind a cloud, and the courtyard fell into shadow. "Vikramji," Bhaskar said slowly, "my father worked this land before your father owned it. He worked it for the landlord before yours. He taught me that the land is a living thing. It gives, but it must also receive. It feeds, but it must also be fed. A man who takes everything and gives nothing back will eventually find that there is nothing left to take." "Your father was a farmer," Vikram said. "I am a landowner. We see the world differently." "Yes," Bhaskar said, "we do." The tenants paid what they could. It was not half. It was closer to a quarter. Vikram recorded the difference as debt. Each family now owed him not only the ongoing lease, but the accumulated shortfall from this year's harvest. Debt upon debt. A weight that would grow heavier with each season, because Vikram charged interest on unpaid balances. This is how poverty deepens. Not through a single blow, but through a slow tightening. A noose made not of rope, but of numbers in a ledger, of terms and conditions, of small disadvantages that compound over time until they become inescapable. The following year, Vikram required 20 days of labor during planting season. His indigo fields had expanded. The prices were still good. He saw no reason to limit himself. The tenants' crops failed again. Worse this time. The debt grew. The year after that, 25 days. The tenants were now spending nearly the entire planting season in Vikram's fields. Their own plots were afterthoughts, planted desperately in whatever time remained, yielding less and less each year. Bhaskar's wife fell ill. The poor harvests meant poor food, and poor food meant weakened bodies, and weakened bodies meant that the fever that swept through the valley that winter found easy hosts. She lay in their small house, shivering under thin blankets, while Bhaskar boiled rice water and held it to her lips with trembling hands. He went to Vikram to ask for an advance, enough to buy medicine from the town. Vikram considered the request. He could afford it easily. The amount Bhaskar needed was less than what Vikram spent on a single dinner with the merchants from the city. It was nothing. A pebble on a mountain. "I will add it to your debt," Vikram said, "with interest." Bhaskar took the money. His wife recovered slowly, but the debt grew like a vine climbing a wall, reaching into every corner of their lives. By the 4th year, several families had given up. They could not pay what they owed. They could not feed their children. They packed what little they had and left, walking down the valley road toward the city, toward uncertain futures, toward lives as laborers and beggars and servants in other people's homes. Vikram watched them go from his upper window. He felt nothing in particular. These were business decisions. People who could not meet their obligations naturally moved on. That was how the world worked. New tenants would come. There were always more poor families looking for land. But new tenants did not come. Word had spread through the valley and beyond. Vikram's terms were known. His reputation had traveled ahead of him, carried by the families who had left, spoken in marketplaces and tea houses and along the roads where travelers shared news. No one wanted to farm Vikram's land. The plots left empty by the departed families grew wild. Weeds rose through the untended soil. The irrigation channels silted up. The careful terracing that generations of farmers had maintained began to erode. Rain washed the topsoil downhill in brown rivers, carrying away the rich dark earth that had made this land the finest in the valley. Vikram hired day laborers from the city to work the abandoned plots. But city men did not know the land. They did not understand its rhythms. They did not feel the soil between their fingers and know what it needed. They worked their hours and collected their wages and went home, leaving behind fields that were worked but not tended, used but not loved. The yields declined, not just on the abandoned plots, on all the plots. The remaining tenants, exhausted and indebted, and spending most of their time in Vikram's indigo fields, could not maintain the land properly. The soil, that living thing Bhaskar's father had spoken of, was being depleted, drained, used up. Year after year of taking without giving back. Year after year of chemicals for the indigo leaching into the earth, poisoning the delicate balance of organisms that made the soil fertile. The river still flowed. The rain still fell. But the land was dying. And then the indigo market collapsed. It happened the way such things always happen, slowly and then all at once. A new synthetic dye was developed in a distant country. It was cheaper, more consistent, easier to produce. The merchants who had paid handsomely for Vikram's indigo began placing smaller orders, then no orders. The price fell like a stone dropped from a height. Vikram sat in his stone house, looking at his ledgers. The numbers told a story he did not want to read. His indigo was worth a fraction of what it had been. His tenant farmers were producing less each year. The abandoned plots were costing him money to maintain. His debts, because even Vikram had debts, to the merchants who had supplied him with seed and equipment, were coming due. He had been rich. He was becoming something else. Take a gentle breath now. Let it come without effort. Feel how your body has been listening to this story, perhaps holding tension in your shoulders, perhaps tightening somewhere without your knowing. Let that tightness dissolve now. Let it flow out of you like water through sand. You are not Vikram. You are not Bhaskar. You are the one listening, resting, breathing in the darkness. These stories move through you like wind through an open window. They enter, they touch you, and they pass through. Rest now. Feel the softness of this moment. Feel how the night holds you. Feel how your breath asks nothing of you except to let it continue. Let us return to the story. It is nearly done. Bhaskar was still there. Through everything, he had remained. He had watched the other families leave. He had watched the land decline. He had buried his wife the previous winter, gently beneath the mango tree she had loved. The tree that grew at the edge of the plot his family had worked for 3 generations. He was old now. His hands were stiff. His back ached in the mornings with a deep, grinding pain that did not ease until midday, if it eased at all. His children had grown and gone to the city, all except his youngest daughter, Priya, who had stayed to care for him. One morning, Vikram came to the fields. This was unusual. Vikram rarely visited the fields anymore. He had retreated into his stone house, into his ledgers, into a shrinking world of numbers and anxieties. But this morning he came. He walked along the paths between the plots, and what he saw silenced him. The soil that his father had loved, the rich dark earth that could grow anything, was pale and hard and cracked. The irrigation channels were choked with silt. The terraces were crumbling. Weeds grew where crops should have been. The land looked exhausted. It looked the way a person looks after a long illness, hollow and gray and diminished. He found Bhaskar sitting under the mango tree, sharpening a tool. The old farmer looked up as Vikram approached. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Vikram said something he had never said before. Not to a tenant, not to anyone. What happened to this land? Bhaskar set down his tool. He looked at Vikram with eyes that held no anger, though they had every right to. They were tired eyes, old eyes, but there was something in them that was not tired at all. Something that had survived everything that had been done to it. A clarity, a patience, a seeing you took from it, Bhaskar said simply. Year after year, you took the labor that should have gone to its care. You took the harvests that should have been returned as compost. You planted chemicals that poisoned its life. You drove away the people who knew it and loved it and understood what it needed. And now it has nothing left to give you. But the soil was the richest in the valley. It was. Your father knew that. He treated it as a partner. He gave to it as much as he took. He rested it when it needed rest. He fed it when it was hungry. He understood that wealth does not come from the land. It comes through the land. The land is not the source, but the channel. And when you block a channel, when you exhaust it, when you demand from it more than it can bear, the channel dries up. Vikram looked at the cracked earth beneath his fine shoes. What do I do? He asked, and his voice was very small. Bhaskar was quiet for a long time. The wind moved through the mango tree. A bird sang somewhere. The sky was very blue and very far away. You begin by putting back what you took, Bhaskar said. You forgive the debts you are owed by the families who worked this land. You let the exhausted fields rest fallow for a full year, 2 years, however long they need. You clear the irrigation channels. You rebuild the terraces. You bring compost and green manure, and you return to the soil what has been stripped from it. That will cost me everything I have left. Yes, Bhaskar said. The word hung in the air between them. Yes, not a comfort, not a judgment, just a simple acknowledgement of fact. You took everything from this land and from the people who worked it, Bhaskar continued. The cost of restoration is everything you have. That is not punishment, Vikramji. That is balance. That is the wheel turning. That is karma. Vikram stood very still. The sun was warm on his shoulders. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant rain. He could feel the ground beneath his feet, hard and unyielding. nothing like the soft, yielding earth his father had walked on, earth that welcomed the foot and gave way gently, earth that was alive. He had killed it. Slowly, methodically, through years of greed and indifference, he had killed the living earth that had been given to him. "My father would be ashamed," Vikram said. "Your father would want you to begin again," Bhaskar replied. "That is what farmers do. No matter how bad the season, no matter how poor the harvest, no matter how damaged the soil, we begin again. We plant, we tend, we wait. We trust the earth to respond if we give it what it needs." "You speak of the earth as if it were alive." It is alive, Vikramji. Every handful of healthy soil contains more living creatures than there are people in this valley. They are small. They are invisible. But they are the ones who do the true work of growing. They break down what is dead and turn it into food for what is living. They are the hidden workers in every field, and you have been starving them for years. Vikram sat down on the ground. It was the first time in his adult life that he had sat in the dirt of his own land. He could feel the hardness of it through his fine clothes, the unyielding, exhausted, depleted earth that had once been the richest in the valley. He sat there for a long time. Priya, Bhaskar's daughter, brought tea. She poured it into 2 cups and gave one to her father and one to Vikram. She did this without ceremony, without deference, without the careful distance that tenants usually maintained with their landlord. She poured tea as one human being pours tea for another. Simply, kindly. Vikram held the warm cup in his hands and felt something he had not felt in years. He could not name it at first. It was unfamiliar, like a word in a language he had once known but had forgotten. Then it came to him. It was gratitude. Simple gratitude for a cup of tea given freely by someone who owed him nothing and from whom he had taken much. He drank the tea. It was strong and sweet, and it warmed him from the inside. "I will do what you say," he told Bhaskar. "I will forgive the debts. I will rest the fields. I will restore what I can." "It will take time," Bhaskar said. "The soil does not recover in a season. Neither do people." "How long?" "As long as it takes. A farmer does not ask the seed how long it will take to grow. He plants it, and he tends it, and he waits." This story shows us the karma of exploitation. Vikram discovered that extracting maximum value from land and people without giving back does not create lasting wealth. It creates a debt that compounds with time, a debt owed not to any authority, but to the living systems that sustain us. Buddhism teaches that greed, one of the 3 poisons, does not simply harm others. It consumes the very foundation upon which the greedy person stands. Like a man who burns the beams of his house to keep warm, the comfort is temporary and the collapse is certain. The Buddha called this tanha, craving or thirst, the endless desire for more. Vikram's thirst was not for water, but for wealth, and in pursuing it without restraint, he drained the living world around him until there was nothing left. His karma was not delivered by an outside force. It grew naturally from the conditions he himself had created: the impoverished soil, the departed tenants, the collapsed market. These were not punishments. They were consequences, as natural as a plant withering when it is not watered, as inevitable as a fire dying when there is no more wood. When we take from the world without giving back, when we treat the living earth and the living beings around us as resources to be extracted rather than relationships to be nurtured, we set in motion a karma that will find us. Not because the universe is watching and keeping score, but because we are part of the web we are destroying. We cannot pull out the threads without unraveling the part that holds us. Let us pause here and breathe together. Feel your body. Feel how it has settled deeper into rest. Feel the gentle weight of your limbs, the softness of your belly, the easy rhythm of your breath. You have been listening, and listening is its own kind of rest. You do not need to remember every word. You do not need to hold every teaching. They are seeds. They have been planted. They will grow in their own time, at their own pace, in their own way. Let your mind grow quiet now. Let the story of Vikram settle like leaves settling on the surface of a pond. They rest there for a moment, turning slowly, and then they sink, gently, silently, down through the clear water to the bottom, where they become part of the earth again. Breathe in, breathe out. Feel the simplicity of it. Feel how your body does this one thing perfectly, without instruction, without effort, without any need for you to intervene. You are breathing. You are resting. You are here, and another story is waiting, patient as a tree, ready to share its shade whenever you are ready to sit beneath it. Let us explore this story now. There once lived a moneylender named Sura. She was a small woman with a sharp mind and a voice that could fill a room without being raised. She sat behind a wooden desk in a shop on the main street of a trading town, and from that desk she conducted business that reached into every corner of the community. Sura lent money. That was her trade, her skill, her inheritance from her mother, who had run the same shop before her, and her grandmother before that. 3 generations of women sitting behind that desk, counting coins, writing contracts, holding the invisible threads that connected debtors to creditors across the entire town. Lending money is not, in itself, a harmful act. A farmer needs seed before harvest. A craftsman needs tools before he can make goods to sell. A family needs a roof repaired before the rains come, and the money to repair it may not arrive until after. Lending bridges the gap between need and means. It is, when practiced with fairness, a service to the community. Sura's grandmother had practiced it with fairness. She had lent at modest rates. She had been flexible with repayment when harvests failed or illness struck. She had understood that her prosperity depended on the prosperity of her borrowers, that a lender who ruins her debtors ruins herself. Sura's mother had been somewhat less generous, somewhat more calculating, but still within the bounds of what the community considered reasonable. Sura was neither generous nor reasonable. She had discovered, early in her career, that the most profitable moment in lending is not when the loan is made. It is not when the interest is paid. It is when the borrower cannot pay. Because that is when the true power of the lender reveals itself. That is when the terms can be renegotiated, the interest compounded, the collateral seized. That is when a small debt becomes a large one, and a large one becomes a life sentence. Sura did not create poverty, but she had learned to profit from it with extraordinary efficiency. Her contracts were complex, written in language that even educated people found difficult to understand. The interest rates seemed modest at first glance, but were compounded in ways that caused debts to grow with alarming speed. A farmer who borrowed 10 silver coins for seed might find himself owing 30 within 2 years, and 60 within 4. And by the time he understood what had happened, the debt had grown larger than the value of everything he owned. And that was when Sura would come for his land. She had acquired over the years a considerable amount of property this way: houses, fields, workshops, market stalls, all seized from borrowers who could not pay, all technically legal, all documented in contracts that the borrowers had signed with their own hands or their own thumbprints, not fully understanding what they were agreeing to. The town knew what Sura was. They called her the spider, though never to her face. They said she sat in her web and waited for the flies to come to her. They said her desk was made from the bones of the people she had ruined. These were unkind things to say. They were also not entirely wrong. Sura did not see herself this way. She saw herself as disciplined, strategic, intelligent. She had taken her grandmother's modest business and multiplied it tenfold. She had more wealth than anyone in the town except the magistrate, and even the magistrate owed her favors, because even magistrates sometimes need loans. She lived in a fine house at the end of the main street. She ate well. She dressed simply, but in fabric of the highest quality. She had no husband, no children, no family except a niece named Kavi, her dead sister's daughter, whom she had raised since the girl was 7. Kavi was 20 now. She worked in the shop, learning the business, handling the simpler accounts. She was quiet where Sura was sharp, gentle where Sura was hard. She had her aunt's intelligence but not her appetite. She looked at the ledgers and saw not just numbers, but the people behind them. The farmer who had borrowed for seed, the widow who had borrowed for her son's medicine, the young couple who had borrowed to start a pottery business. Kavi saw them when they came into the shop. She saw their faces. She saw the fear in their eyes when Sura explained the terms. She saw how their shoulders curved inward as they signed, as if the weight of the debt was already settling onto them before they had even received the coins. She said nothing about this to her aunt. She had learned, over 13 years of living with Sura, that certain observations were not welcome. But she thought about it. At night, lying in her small room above the shop, listening to the sounds of the town settling into sleep, she thought about the web her aunt had woven and the people caught in it, and she wondered what it would feel like when the web itself began to tear. It was a weaver named Parul who finally pulled too hard on one of Sura's threads. Parul was a woman of 40, strong-armed from years at the loom, with deep-set eyes and a mouth that rarely smiled, but, when it did, transformed her whole face into something warm and lovely. She wove cloth of exceptional quality, cotton so fine it felt like water between the fingers, silk blends with patterns so intricate that merchants came from distant towns specifically to buy her work. She had borrowed from Sura 3 years earlier. Her loom had broken, the great wooden frame cracking along a fault line that had been invisible until the day it gave way, splitting the structure in two and destroying the half-finished cloth that had been stretched upon it. A new loom was expensive, months of savings, and Parul had no savings. Everything she earned went to materials, to food, to the rent on her small workshop. She went to Sura. The loan was for 20 silver coins. The interest, as Sura explained it, was quite reasonable, just a small percentage each month. Parul signed the contract. She did not fully understand the clause about compounding, about interest charged upon unpaid interest, about the way the debt would grow if payments were late. Sura explained it quickly, in language that slid past like water over smooth stones, and Parul nodded because she needed the money, and her loom was broken, and she could not work without it. For 2 years, Parul made her payments. She worked long hours, her shuttle flying back and forth, the cloth growing under her hands, and each month she brought coins to Sura's desk and watched the small woman record them in her ledger. But in the 3rd year, Parul's eyes began to fail. It is the curse of weavers. The close work, the fine threads, the hours of intense focus in lamplight. The eyes tire. The vision blurs. What was once sharp becomes soft, and the patterns that the hands know by heart begin to drift. the threads crossing where they should not, the colors bleeding into each other. Parul's production slowed. The quality, which had been her greatest asset, began to decline. Merchants who had once competed for her cloth now hesitated, holding the fabric up to the light, finding imperfections that had never been there before. Her income fell. Her payments to Sura became irregular. First 1 month late, then 2. Then she missed a payment entirely, and the compounding clause awakened like a sleeping creature, and the debt began to grow. She went to Sura to explain. She stood before the wooden desk, her strong hands clasped in front of her, her failing eyes fixed on the small woman behind the ledger. "My eyes are going," she said. "I cannot work as fast as I could. I need time. If you can reduce the payments for a few months, I will find a way. I can take on an apprentice. I can teach someone my patterns. I can adapt." Sura looked at her ledger. She looked at Parul. She made a calculation that had nothing to do with compassion and everything to do with profit. "Your workshop," Sura said. "It is on Dyer's Lane, yes? Near the river?" "Yes." "The property is worth approximately 80 silver coins. Your remaining debt, with accumulated interest and penalties, is 73 silver coins. I can offer you a revised arrangement. Sign the workshop over to me as collateral, and I will extend your repayment period by 6 months. Parul stared at her. "The workshop is all I have. If I sign it over and cannot pay, I lose everything. If you do not sign it over and cannot pay, you will also lose everything, but through the courts, which is slower, more expensive, and more unpleasant for everyone." This was the heart of Sura's method. Not cruelty, exactly. Efficiency. The efficient conversion of human desperation into property and profit. Parul signed. She signed because she had no choice, because choice is a luxury that belongs to those who are not drowning, and Parul was drowning. She signed with hands that had created beauty for 20 years, hands that had turned raw thread into cloth that made people stop and stare and reach out to touch. She pressed her thumb into ink and then onto the paper, and the print sat there like a small, dark wound. 6 months later, Parul's eyes had worsened. She could still weave, but slowly, and only simple patterns. The fine work that had been her signature, the work that commanded high prices, was beyond her now. She could not make her payments. Sura took the workshop. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Sura arrived with a magistrate's clerk and a document bearing an official seal. Parul stood in the doorway of the place where she had worked for 20 years, the place that smelled of cotton dust and dye and the particular warmth of wood that has been touched by 10,000 hours of labor. And she watched a stranger nail a notice to her door. The notice said that the property now belonged to Sura of Main Street, moneylender, by legal transfer of collateral against unpaid debt. Parul gathered her personal belongings, her tools, her remaining thread, a small wooden box that held her mother's thimble and her grandmother's bone needle. She packed them into a cloth bundle and walked out of the workshop without looking back. Kavi watched from the shop window across the street. She saw Parul walk down Dyer's Lane toward the river, her bundle on her back, her strong shoulders bent not with the weight of what she carried, but with the weight of what she had lost. That evening, Kavi sat with her aunt in the fine house at the end of the main street. Dinner was laid out before them, good food, well prepared, more than 2 people could eat. Sura ate with her usual precise efficiency, cutting her food into small pieces, chewing thoroughly, wasting nothing. "Aunt," Kavi said. "Yes." "The weaver, Parul." Sura looked up. Her eyes were sharp even in the lamplight. "What about her?" "She had no other place to go." She is sleeping in the market tonight, under the awning of the grain seller's stall. That is unfortunate, but not my concern. She signed a contract. She could not fulfill its terms. The collateral was activated. This is how lending works, Kavi. I have explained this. She borrowed 20 coins for a loom. She paid back more than 20 coins over 2 years. And now she has lost a workshop worth 80 coins. How is that fair? Sura set down her knife. She looked at her niece with an expression that was not angry, but was perhaps something worse. It was patient. It was the patience of someone who has explained a thing many times and has resigned herself to explaining it once more. Fair is a word for children, Kavi. Business operates on contracts, not fairness. Parul agreed to the terms. She understood the risks. She signed of her own free will. No one forced her. She signed because her loom was broken and she could not work. She signed because she was desperate. That is not the same as free will. Something flickered in Sura's eyes. A shadow, a tightening. Then it was gone. Eat your dinner, Sura said. Kavi ate her dinner, but the food sat in her stomach like river stones, heavy and cold and impossible to digest. Let us rest here for a moment. Feel your body softening. Feel the places where you hold tension, the small knots in your shoulders, the tightness at the base of your skull, the clenching in your jaw that you may not have noticed until this very moment. Notice them. And then, gently, let them go. You do not need to hold anything right now. Not your body, not your thoughts, not the stories you have been hearing. Let them all rest. Let them settle into the quiet darkness like stones settling to the bottom of a deep, still lake. Breathe in. Feel the breath fill you. Breathe out. Feel the breath leave you. Each exhale carries something away. Tension, worry, the residue of the day. Let it all go. There is nothing you need to keep, nothing you need to carry into sleep. The story of Sura continues. Over the following months, Kavi began to pay attention in a way she had not before. She had always known what her aunt did. She had always understood, in the abstract, that money lending at the rates Sura charged caused harm. But knowing something abstractly and seeing it with your own eyes are different experiences, separated by the same distance that separates reading about fire and putting your hand into flame. She began to see the people who came to the shop not as accounts in a ledger, but as lives. She saw the tea seller who had borrowed to repair his cart and was now paying 3 times what the repairs had cost. She saw the elderly couple who had borrowed for their grandson's wedding and were slowly losing their home. She saw the young potter who had borrowed to buy a kiln and was working 18 hours a day, every day, producing pot after pot that he sold for just enough to cover his interest payments, never touching the principal, running in place like a man on a wheel that never stops turning. She saw them come in with money they could not afford to give, and she saw them leave lighter in coin and heavier in spirit, and she recorded their payments in the ledger with neat, careful numbers that told a story of slow strangulation. And she began to do something that would have horrified her aunt if she had known. She began to talk to the borrowers. Not in the shop. Never in the shop, where Sura's sharp ears missed nothing. But in the market, at the well, on the riverbank, where women washed clothes and shared news, Kavi sought out the people whose names appeared in the ledger, and she asked them about their debts, not the numbers. The feelings, the weight, the fear. What she heard confirmed what she had already suspected. Sura's contracts were designed to fail. Not every contract, not every borrower, but enough of them. The terms were structured so that a certain percentage of borrowers, the most vulnerable, the most desperate, the ones who could least afford to lose what they had, would inevitably default. And when they defaulted, Sura would take what they had. It was not illegal. It was not even, by the standards of the time, unusual. Moneylenders throughout the region operated on similar principles, but Sura was better at it than most. More efficient, more thorough, more patient. Kavi also began to notice something else, something that happened so gradually that it was nearly invisible, like the slow turning of a season or the gradual graying of hair. Her aunt was becoming isolated. It had been happening for years, but Kavi had not seen it clearly until now. The townspeople who had once greeted Sura in the market now crossed the street to avoid her. The merchants who had once invited her to their gatherings no longer sent invitations. The temple where Sura had worshipped since childhood had quietly asked her to sit in the back, away from the other congregants, after several families had complained that they could not pray in the presence of the woman who held their debts. Sura pretended not to notice these things. She went about her business with the same sharp efficiency, the same precise movements, the same voice that could fill a room without being raised. But Kavi saw the small changes. The way Sura lingered at the shop window sometimes, watching people pass on the street outside, people who did not look in. The way she set the dinner table for two each evening with a care that seemed excessive for a simple meal. The way she sometimes paused in the middle of a sentence, as if she had lost the thread of what she was saying, and then picked it up again with a small shake of her head. Sura was 61 years old. She had spent 40 years behind that desk. She had accumulated wealth that would last several lifetimes, and she had no one, no friends, no community, no one who came to her door except those who owed her money and those who needed to borrow it. No one except Kavi. One afternoon, a monk came to the shop. He was old, with a face like a dried riverbed, all lines and channels carved by years of sun and wind. He wore simple robes and carried nothing but a bowl and a cloth bag. He did not come to borrow. He came to sit. He sat on the bench outside the shop in the shade of the awning, and he simply sat there, still and quiet as a stone. Sura noticed him after an hour. She stepped outside. "Can I help you?" she asked, and her voice carried the particular edge it always had when addressing someone who was not a paying customer. "No," the monk said pleasantly. "I am simply sitting." "You are sitting in front of my shop. People will think you are waiting for something." "People think many things," the monk said. "Most of them are wrong. It is one of the great entertainments of being alive." Despite herself, Sura almost smiled. Almost. "I know who you are," she said. "You are the traveling teacher who was here last month, the one who spoke in the market about attachment and suffering. I am, and you are Sura, the moneylender, the one they call the spider." If the word stung, Sura did not show it. "They call me many things. I find that the names people give you say more about them than about you." "Sometimes that is true," the monk agreed. "And sometimes the names are simply accurate." Sura looked at him. He looked back at her. His eyes were clear, not unkind, but not soft either. They were the eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime looking at things exactly as they were, without adding anything or taking anything away. "What do you want?" Sura asked. "I want nothing. I came to this town because I was hungry, and the people here are generous with food. I sat in front of your shop because the shade is good and the bench is comfortable. I did not come to teach you anything. I did not come to judge you. I came to sit." "Then sit," Sura said, and went back inside. But something had been disturbed. The monk's presence, his calm refusal to want anything from her, had created a small disturbance in the still, controlled waters of Sura's inner world. Like a single pebble dropped into a pond, the ripples were small, but they spread. The monk returned the next day, and the day after. Each afternoon, he sat on the bench outside the shop, his bowl beside him, his eyes half closed, his breathing steady and slow. He did not speak to Sura unless she spoke to him. He did not look at her through the window. He simply sat. On the fourth day, Sura brought him tea. She did not know why she did it. It was unlike her. She did not give things away. Not tea, not money, not kindness. Everything she dispensed came with terms and conditions. But she brought the tea anyway, in a simple cup, and she set it on the bench beside him without a word. "Thank you," the monk said. Sura sat down on the other end of the bench. She had no reason to. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But she sat. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "You spoke in the market about karma, about how our actions return to us. The farmers and the merchants, they love that kind of talk. They believe that the universe is keeping a ledger, that someday the bad people will be punished and the good people will be rewarded. Is that what you believe?" The monk took a sip of tea. He held the cup in both hands, the way a person holds something precious. "No," he said. "That is not what I believe. The universe does not keep a ledger. There is no cosmic accountant tallying debts and credits. Karma is simpler than that and more complex." "Explain it to me then." "As you would to someone who does not believe in things she cannot see." The monk set down his tea. He looked at the street, at the people passing by, at the dogs sleeping in patches of sun, at the dust motes drifting in the warm air. "When you drop a stone into water," he said, "ripples move outward. You can see them. You can count them. They are not punishment for the stone being dropped. They are simply what happens when a stone meets water. Karma is like that. Every action creates ripples. Generous actions create one kind of ripple. Harmful actions create another. The ripples move outward. They touch other lives. They bounce off the edges of the pond, and eventually, they return to the place where the stone was dropped." "But that is just cause and effect," Sura said. "I understand cause and effect. I use it every day. It is the basis of my entire business." "Yes," the monk said. "Exactly. You do use it every day. You understand that if you lend money at high rates to desperate people, they will struggle to repay. You understand that if they struggle to repay, their debts will grow. You understand that if their debts grow, they will eventually lose what little they have. You understand every link in that chain. You understand cause and effect very well." He paused. Then he continued gently. "What you have not yet understood is that you are also in the water. You are not the hand that drops the stone. You are in the pond. The ripples that move outward from your actions pass through other lives, yes, but they also pass through yours. They are passing through you right now." Sura was quiet for a long time. The street moved around them. A cart passed, its wheels creaking. A child ran by, laughing. Somewhere a dog barked. "I sit behind my desk," Sura said slowly, "and I see the numbers. I see the contracts. I see the interest accruing, the payments coming in, the properties being transferred. I see it all very clearly. It is orderly. It is logical. It makes sense." "And what do you feel?" The question was so simple that it caught Sura off guard. She opened her mouth to answer and found that she did not know what to say. "I feel..." She stopped. She looked at her hands, small and precise, hands that had counted coins and written contracts for 40 years. "I feel nothing. I feel efficient. I feel competent. I feel that the business is running well. And when you go home at night, when you sit at your table, when you lie in your bed?" Sura did not answer. She picked up her tea and drank it, and the silence that followed was not empty, but full of something unspoken that pressed against the walls of her chest like water against a dam. The monk did not push. He simply sat, and after a while, Sura went back inside, and the monk remained on his bench, and the afternoon light shifted slowly across the street, and the shadows grew long, and the day turned gently toward evening. That night, Kavi found her aunt sitting in the dark, not in the sitting room, where they usually spent their evenings, not in the bedroom, in the shop. Sura was sitting behind her desk, in the chair where she had sat for 40 years, but the lanterns were not lit. The ledgers were closed. The room was dark except for the moonlight that came through the window, painting silver rectangles on the floor. "Aunt," Kavi said from the doorway, "are you well?" "I am thinking," Sura said. Her voice was different. The sharp edge was still there, but beneath it was something else, something unsteady. "About what?" "About what I feel. A monk asked me today what I feel, and I could not answer. I have not thought about what I feel in a very long time. Perhaps I have never thought about it. I have thought about what I know, what I understand, what I can calculate and predict and control. But feel, that is a different ledger, one I have not been keeping." Kavi came into the room. She sat on the small stool that borrowers used when they sat across from Sura's desk. She had never sat there before. She had always stood behind her aunt, watching, recording, learning. But tonight, she sat in the borrower's chair, and she looked at her aunt across the desk, and she saw what the borrowers must have always seen, a small woman behind a large desk, surrounded by ledgers and contracts, fortified by numbers. "What did the monk say to you?" Kavi asked. "He said I am in the water, that I am not separate from the consequences of what I do, that the ripples pass through me as they pass through everyone else." She paused. "I have always believed I was separate, that I was the one who creates the conditions, not the one who is affected by them, the hand that drops the stone, not the water. And now?" Sura was quiet for so long that Kavi thought she might not answer. The moonlight moved slowly across the floor. A night bird called somewhere. A single clear note repeated 3 times. Then silence. "Now I am not sure," Sura said. "I look at this desk, at these ledgers, and I see 40 years. I see every contract I have written, every property I have taken, every person who has sat where you are sitting now and signed away something they could not afford to lose. I see it all. And I find myself wondering something I have never wondered before." "What?" "Whether the wealth I have accumulated is truly wealth, or whether it is something else entirely. Something that looks like wealth from the outside, but feels like something different when you hold it close. Something that fills the house but empties the rooms. Something that grows the ledger, but shrinks the life." Kavi felt tears come to her eyes, not of sadness exactly, but of something closer to relief. The relief of hearing someone finally say the thing that has been true for a long time, but has never been spoken aloud. "Aunt," she said softly, "do you remember what grandmother used to say about the difference between a full purse and a full life?" Sura closed her eyes. "She said a full purse is heavy to carry, but a full life is light. She said the richest woman she ever knew owned nothing but a cooking pot and had friends in every village from here to the mountains. She also said that a lender who forgets she is lending to human beings will eventually forget she is a human being herself. The moonlight had moved across the entire floor now, reaching the far wall, beginning to climb. The night was deep and the town was quiet, and the two women sat across the desk from each other in the silver dark, the ledgers closed between them like sleeping things. "I am tired, Kavi," Sura said, and there was something in her voice that went deeper than the tiredness of a long day. It was the tiredness of a long life lived in one direction, a direction that had seemed right and productive and logical, and that now, in the moonlit quiet of an empty shop, seemed like something else entirely. "Then rest," Kavi said. "We can talk more tomorrow." "Tomorrow I have to collect from the potter and the tea seller and the old couple on Temple Road. Those can wait. Debts do not wait. That is the first thing my mother taught me." "Perhaps," Kavi said gently, "that is not the only true thing." Sura opened her eyes. She looked at her niece, and for the first time in as long as Kavi could remember, the sharp, precise, efficient woman behind the desk looked uncertain, not weak, not broken, simply uncertain, like a person who has been walking a familiar road and has suddenly realized that the road has been curving so slowly and so gradually that she did not notice, and that she is no longer heading where she thought she was. "Come," Kavi said. "Come upstairs. I will make tea." Sura rose from her chair. She moved stiffly, like someone who has been sitting in one position for too long. She followed Kavi out of the shop, through the doorway, up the narrow stairs to their living quarters above. Behind them, the moonlight continued its slow journey across the shop floor, illuminating the desk, the chair, the closed ledgers, the rows of contracts filed in wooden boxes along the wall. It touched each thing with equal light. It judged nothing. It simply shone. "Let us breathe together now. Feel the air entering your body. Feel it filling your chest, your belly, the spaces between your ribs. Feel how your body expands to receive it, how it opens without effort, how it trusts this rhythm that has sustained you since the moment you were born. And breathe out. Feel everything soften. Feel the weight of your body pressing gently into the surface beneath you. Feel how gravity holds you, not trapping you, but cradling you, keeping you in exactly the place you need to be. You do not need to think about Sura now. You do not need to think about contracts or debts or moonlit shops. These images will keep. They will wait for you like patient friends, ready to offer their wisdom whenever you are ready to receive it. For now, there is only this breath, this darkness, this soft, warm stillness that wraps around you like a blanket woven from silence itself. Rest here. There is no hurry. The next story will come when it comes, like dawn, like rain, like the slow unfolding of a flower that opens not because anyone tells it to, but because the light is right and the time has come. The monk returned to his bench the following afternoon, and this time Sura came out to meet him without pretense. She brought 2 cups of tea and sat beside him, and there was a directness in her manner that had not been there before, not aggression, not challenge, simply the directness of someone who has decided to stop pretending. "I could not sleep last night," she said. "That is often what happens when we begin to see clearly," the monk replied. "The eyes open, and the first thing they see is the dark." "I want to understand something," Sura said. "You told me that karma is not a ledger, that the universe does not keep accounts. But I keep accounts. That is all I do. I measure what is owed and what is paid. If karma is not a ledger, then what is it?" The monk held his tea and watched the steam curl upward into the afternoon air. A thin white thread of vapor that twisted and dissolved and became nothing. "Watch the steam," he said. Sura looked at it. "Where does it go?" the monk asked. It dissipates. It becomes part of the air. Can you call it back? No. Can you separate it from the air once it is mixed? No. It is gone. It is not gone, the monk said. It has changed form. It has become part of something larger. It is still water. It is still here. But it has spread so widely that you cannot see it anymore. It has become invisible, but it has not ceased to exist. He set down his cup. Your actions are like that steam. You release them into the world and they spread. They become part of the air that everyone breathes. The contracts you write, the debts you impose, the properties you seize, these are not contained within your shop. They spread outward. They change the air of this entire town. They change how people feel when they walk down this street. They change how families speak to each other at night when they are worried about money. They change how children sleep or do not sleep when their parents are afraid. But I cannot see those things, Sura said. I see the contracts. I see the numbers. I see what is measurable. Yes, and that is precisely the problem. You have trained yourself to see only what can be measured. But the most important things in life cannot be measured. Trust cannot be measured. Peace of mind cannot be measured. The feeling of safety that a family has when they know their home is secure, that cannot be entered in a ledger. And the feeling of dread that a family has when they know they may lose everything, that cannot be measured either. But it is real. It is as real as the coins in your strongbox. More real, perhaps, because coins can be replaced, but certain kinds of fear, once planted, grow roots that reach down for generations. Sura sat with this. She held her tea and felt its warmth against her palms, and sat with the monk's words, the way one sits with a heavy rain, not fighting it, not welcoming it, just being in it. My grandmother, she said after a while, lent at modest rates. She was flexible with repayment. She was, by any measure, a less successful businesswoman than I am. And yet, when she died, the entire town came to her funeral. They lined the streets. They wept. They placed flowers on her pyre, and they spoke her name with love. She paused. When I die, no one will come. The monk did not contradict her. He did not offer false comfort. He simply sat with the truth of what she had said, honoring it with his silence. Is it too late? Sura asked, and her voice was so quiet that the monk had to lean closer to hear. I am 61 years old. I have spent 40 years building this web. Can it be unwoven? A web can always be unwoven, the monk said, thread by thread. It takes patience, it takes willingness, and it requires something that may be the hardest thing of all for you. What? Loss. To undo what you have done, you will need to lose what you have gained. The properties, the accumulated interest, the debts that people owe you. These are the threads of your web. To unweave the web, you must release the threads. And each thread you release will feel like losing something, because you have spent your life believing that holding is strength and releasing is weakness. And what does Buddhism say? Is releasing strength? The monk smiled. It was the first time Sura had seen him smile. It transformed his weathered face, softening the lines, warming the eyes, making him look for a moment like a much younger man who had simply been carrying an older man's face. Buddhism says that holding is the cause of suffering, not holding itself, but the belief that what we hold can make us safe. We hold our possessions and believe they protect us. We hold our status and believe it defines us. We hold our habits and believe they sustain us. And all the while, the holding itself is the very thing that keeps us trapped. It is like a woman who grips a rope so tightly that her hands bleed, not realizing that she is standing on solid ground and the rope is attached to nothing. Attached to nothing, Sura repeated. Your wealth, your properties, your ledgers full of debts. What did they give you, Sura? What did they actually provide? She thought about this with the same precision she brought to her accounts. She thought carefully, honestly, the way she had not allowed herself to think in many years. Security, she said. Are you secure? She stopped. I have the means to be secure. I have money. I have property. Are you secure? The monk asked again, gently. The question sat between them like a stone on still water. Sura felt it sink through the layers of her carefully constructed life, through the ledgers and the contracts and the properties and the coins, down through the routines and the habits and the sharp voice that could fill a room, down and down until it reached the bottom, the place she never looked, the place where the truth lived. No, she whispered, I am not secure. I have never been secure. I am afraid all the time. I am afraid of losing what I have. I am afraid that the debtors will default and the properties will lose value and the money will run out. I am afraid that I am alone. I am afraid that when I die, I will have lived an entire life and it will have meant nothing to anyone. The words came out of her like water from a cracked vessel, not rushing, not dramatic, just a steady flow of truth that had been contained for too long and could no longer be held. The monk placed his hand on the bench between them, not touching her, just resting there, open and still. This is the beginning, he said. Not the end, the beginning. You have just done something that most people never do. You have looked at the truth of your life without looking away. You have seen that what you built to make yourself safe has made you afraid, that what you accumulated to fill your life has emptied it. That is not failure, Sura. That is seeing clearly. And seeing clearly is the first step on every path worth walking. Sura looked at the street. People were passing, the same people who crossed to avoid her, who whispered her name with bitterness, who called her the spider. She watched them, and she saw them, perhaps for the first time, not as potential borrowers, not as names in a ledger, not as sources of income, but as people. People with families and fears and hopes, and the same fundamental wish that she had, to be safe, to be loved, to matter to someone. What do I do? She asked. Practically, specifically, what do I do tomorrow morning when I sit behind that desk? Tomorrow morning, the monk said, you open the ledger to the first page. You read the first name, and you ask yourself, what would my grandmother have done? Sura closed her eyes. She would have forgiven the debt, Sura said. If the person could not pay, she would have forgiven it. She would have said that a person's dignity is worth more than any amount of silver. Then you have your answer. But if I forgive every debt, I will lose. Yes, you will lose. And in the losing, you may find something you did not know you were missing. Something that no amount of silver can purchase and no contract can guarantee. He rose from the bench, picking up his bowl and his cloth bag. You do not need to do everything at once, he said. A web is unwoven thread by thread. Begin with one thread, the one that pulls at you most, the one that keeps you awake at night. Start there. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, not of deference, and walked away down the street. Sura watched him go. His bare feet made no sound on the dusty road. His faded robes caught the late afternoon light and glowed briefly like something burnished. She sat on the bench for a long time after he was gone. The next morning, Sura opened her shop as usual. She lit the lanterns. She arranged her desk. She opened the ledger. Kavi watched from the doorway, uncertain, waiting. Sura looked at the first page, the first name, Parul, the weaver whose workshop she had taken, the woman who was sleeping under the awning of the grain seller's stall. Sura stared at the name for a very long time. Then she picked up her pen, and next to the debt, in her careful, precise handwriting, she wrote a single word: forgiven. She looked at the word. It sat there on the page, small and black and absolute. It did not look like much. It looked like any other word she might have written, but it felt different. It felt like something being released, something that had been held so tightly and for so long that the muscles had forgotten they were holding it. And now, with the simple act of opening, came a flood of sensation, the pain of unclenching, the rush of blood returning, the strange lightness of hands that are finally empty. Kavi saw it from the doorway. She saw her aunt's face change, not dramatically, not with tears or laughter or any of the large emotions that people expect at moments of transformation. It was smaller than that, quieter, a softening around the eyes, a releasing in the jaw, a barely perceptible lowering of the shoulders, as if a weight had been set down. "Aunt?" Kavi said. "Find Parul," Sura said. "Tell her the workshop is hers again. Tell her the debt is forgiven, all of it." Kavi did not move. She stood in the doorway, staring at her aunt, not quite believing what she had heard. "Go," Sura said, and there was the ghost of a smile on her face, tentative and uncertain, like the first green shoot of a plant that has been dormant for a long winter and is not quite sure whether it is safe to grow. Kavi went. She found Parul at the grain seller's stall, sitting on the ground with her bundle beside her, her hands idle in her lap, her failing eyes fixed on nothing. She had the look of someone who has stopped waiting for anything to change, the look of someone who has accepted a diminished world and is learning to live within its narrow walls. "Parul," Kavi said, "come with me. My aunt wants to see you." Fear crossed Parul's face, the fear of the debtor summoned by the creditor, a fear as old as money itself. "I have nothing left to give her," Parul said. "She has something to give you," Kavi replied. "Please come." They walked together to the shop. Parul stood before the desk, her bundle still on her back, her strong hands hanging at her sides. Sura looked at her across the ledger. For a long moment, neither spoke. "Your workshop," Sura said. "It is yours. The debt is canceled. I am returning what I took." Parul did not understand at first. The words seemed to pass through her without landing, as if they were in a language she did not speak. She looked at Kavi, who nodded. She looked back at Sura. "I do not understand," Parul said. "There is nothing to understand. The workshop is yours. There is no debt. You are free." The word hung in the air of the small shop. Free. Such a simple word. Such a small word for such a vast thing. Parul's hands began to shake. She pressed them together to still them. And then she pressed them to her face, and she stood there in front of the moneylender's desk with her hands covering her eyes, and she wept. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a slow, steady release of something that had been held under pressure for a very long time. Sura watched her, and she felt for the first time in memory something that was not efficiency and not competence and not the cold satisfaction of a successful transaction. She felt a warmth in her chest, a spreading warmth, like tea settling into the body on a cold morning, reaching into the places that had been frozen and beginning, gently, to thaw. It hurt. She had not expected that. She had expected to feel virtuous, perhaps, or generous, or at least satisfied. But what she felt was pain. The pain of 40 years of numbness beginning to end. The pain of feeling returning to a limb that has been still for too long. The pins and needles of a heart waking up. This story shows us how karma operates within the one who creates it, not only in the external consequences, but in the internal landscape of the person's own life. Sura discovered that a lifetime of extracting wealth from vulnerable people had not made her wealthy in any way that mattered. It had made her feared, isolated, and profoundly alone. The karma of her actions had not arrived as punishment from outside. It had grown within her like a slow poison until the very success of her business had become the mechanism of her suffering. The Buddha identified 3 root causes of suffering, called the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. In Sura's case, greed and delusion worked together. Her greed drove her to take more than was fair. Her delusion convinced her that what she was accumulating was making her safe. But safety built on the suffering of others is not safety. It is a fortress with no door, keeping the builder imprisoned within walls of her own making. The teaching of karma here is subtle and important. Sura was not struck by lightning. She was not visited by misfortune. Her karma manifested as the natural consequence of how she had lived, a life drained of warmth, connection, and meaning. The emptiness she felt at her dinner table, the loneliness she felt in her fine house, the fear that kept her awake at night, these were not punishments. They were the direct results of a life organized around taking rather than giving, around accumulation rather than connection, around contracts rather than relationships. When we build our lives on the extraction of value from others, we extract something from ourselves as well. We extract our capacity for compassion. We extract our ability to connect. We extract the very quality that makes human life bearable, the knowledge that we matter to someone, not for what we can give them or what they owe us, but simply because we are here, sharing this brief, precious time together. And yet the story also shows us something else, something hopeful. Sura began to change. One word in a ledger, forgiven. One act of releasing. One thread pulled from the web. It was not the end of her karma. 40 years cannot be unwoven in a single morning, but it was the beginning, and every journey, no matter how long, begins with a single step. Every web, no matter how vast, is unwoven thread by thread. Let us pause here now. Let your breath carry you deeper into rest. Feel how your body has been softening throughout these stories, settling further with each word, each pause, each gentle breath. You are closer to sleep now than you were when we began, and that is as it should be. There is nothing to resist, nothing to hold on to. Let yourself drift toward whatever rest awaits you, like a leaf settling slowly through clear water, turning gently, catching the light, and then releasing it, and turning again, and settling further, and further, and further still. Your hands are heavy, your feet are warm, your breath is slow and easy, a rhythm that asks nothing of you, that carries you without effort, that has been faithful to you every moment of your life, and will continue to be faithful long after these words have faded into silence. Rest now. There is another story coming, but it comes to you. You do not need to go to it. You do not need to reach for it. It arrives like the next breath, naturally, gently, without effort. Simply lie here and let it find you. There once lived a magistrate named Harish. He was a careful man, a man who measured his words the way a jeweler measures gems, precisely. holding each one up to the light before setting it down. He spoke slowly, not from dullness, but from deliberation. Every sentence he uttered had been considered, weighed, and found adequate before it left his mouth. Harish had been appointed magistrate of a prosperous district 22 years ago, when he was still young enough to believe that the law was a path to justice, and justice was a path to peace. He had studied under the finest legal scholars. He had memorized the codes and precedents. He had argued cases with brilliance and won more than he lost. And when the appointment came, he had accepted it with a solemn sense of purpose that his family and friends found admirable. For the first several years, he had served well. He adjudicated disputes with fairness. He listened to both sides. He applied the law with consideration for circumstance, understanding that the same action could have different meanings depending on the person who performed it and the conditions under which it was performed. A man who stole bread because his children were starving was not the same as a man who stole bread for the pleasure of taking. The law might see them identically, but justice could not. Harish understood this distinction. He carried it with him like a compass, and it guided him through the complicated terrain of human conflict. But over the years, the compass needle began to drift. It happened so gradually that Harish himself did not notice. It began with small accommodations. A wealthy merchant who appeared before him on a charge of selling adulterated grain offered, through an intermediary, a gift, not a bribe. Nothing so crude, simply a gesture of goodwill. A basket of rare fruit delivered to Harish's home. A bolt of fine silk left at his door with a card expressing admiration for his service to the community. Harish accepted the gifts because refusing them would have caused offense, and causing offense to a powerful merchant was not something a magistrate did without reason. This was not corruption. This was courtesy. This was how the world worked. The merchant's case was decided in his favor. The evidence, Harish told himself, supported the verdict. The grain had been tested and found to be of acceptable quality. The complaint had been exaggerated. The merchant was a reputable businessman with a long history in the community. The decision was correct. Perhaps it was. Perhaps it was not. The truth, in that particular case, was ambiguous enough that the verdict could have gone either way, and it went the way of the man who had sent the fruit and the silk. This was the first accommodation. It was small. It was almost invisible, like the first crack in a dam, hairline thin, barely worth noticing. But water finds cracks, and power finds weakness. And the word went out, quietly, among those who understood such things, that Magistrate Harish was a reasonable man, a man who understood courtesy, a man who could see the nuances of a situation and arrive at the most practical conclusion. More gifts arrived, more cases were decided, and with each decision, the crack widened slightly, and more water seeped through, and the foundation of what Harish had built his life upon grew imperceptibly weaker. He was not a bad man. This is important to understand. He was not venal or cruel or motivated by simple greed. He was a man who had allowed small compromises to accumulate until they formed a pattern, and the pattern had become so familiar that he could no longer see it for what it was. It was like a stain on a wall that one passes every day. At first, it is noticeable. Then it is merely present. Then it is invisible, absorbed into the background of daily life, no longer seen because it has always been there. By the time Harish had been magistrate for 15 years, the stain covered the entire wall. The cases that came before him were no longer decided on their merits. They were decided on a calculus of influence, obligation, and mutual benefit that Harish performed so automatically that he was barely aware of doing it. He still listened to both sides. He still considered the evidence. He still spoke with the same careful deliberation, the same measured words, the same appearance of fairness. But the outcomes were predetermined. The wealthy won, the connected won, the powerful won, and the poor, the unconnected, the powerless, they received justice only when their cases did not conflict with the interests of those who mattered. Harish told himself that this was pragmatism, that a magistrate who antagonized the powerful would not remain a magistrate for long, that his position allowed him to do more good by staying in it than he could do by losing it over a single case. That compromise was not corruption, but wisdom. These were reasonable arguments. They were also the arguments that every compromised person makes to themselves in the dark hours of the night, when the truth presses close and must be pushed away so that sleep can come. And sleep did come, most nights. But it came later and later, and it was thinner than it used to be, and Harish sometimes woke before dawn with a feeling in his chest that he could not name, a tightness, a pressure, as if something were sitting on his ribs, something heavy and patient and impossible to move. His wife, Mira, noticed the changes. She noticed how he lingered over his morning tea, reluctant to go to the courthouse. She noticed how he avoided her eyes when she asked about his day. She noticed the gifts that arrived, the fine things that appeared in their home without explanation, the quiet prosperity that grew around them like moss on a shaded stone. She said nothing for a long time. Mira was a woman who understood the difference between the right moment and every other moment, and she waited for the right one with the patience of a gardener watching fruit ripen on a branch. The right moment came on an evening in the rainy season. Harish had presided that day over a land dispute between a wealthy landowner and a community of farmers who had worked the disputed land for 3 generations. The landowner claimed legal ownership based on a document that was old and possibly forged. The farmers had no documents. They had only their presence on the land, their labor, their memories, their grandparents' graves beneath the mango trees. Harish knew, with the part of himself that still functioned as a compass, that the farmer's claim was stronger. He knew that the document was suspicious. He knew that the landowner had acquired it through means that would not bear scrutiny. He ruled in favor of the landowner. He came home that evening and sat at the dinner table and could not eat. The food was good, prepared by Mira with the care she brought to everything, seasoned with the spices she grew in their garden, served on plates that had been one of the gifts. Beautiful plates, porcelain with a blue pattern that looked like water. He stared at his plate, at the blue water pattern, at the food he could not bring himself to lift to his mouth. Mira sat across from him. She watched him, and then, in her quiet way, she spoke. Harish. He looked up. The farmers on the eastern road. I saw them today at the market. They were talking about the ruling. His jaw tightened. That case was decided on legal grounds. They have children, 11 children among the families. The youngest is 3. They have nowhere to go. The law is the law, Mira. Is it? Or is it something you have made it into? The question was gentle, but it cut deep, deeper than any argument or accusation could have, because it was asked by the one person in the world who knew him completely, who had seen him when he was young and idealistic and certain that law was the path to justice, and who saw him now, 22 years later, sitting at a table set with gifted porcelain, unable to eat the food his wife had prepared because somewhere in his chest a weight was pressing down that no legal argument could lift. Harish set down his spoon. He placed his hands flat on the table, on either side of the plate with its blue water pattern. and he looked at his wife with eyes that were very tired. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "I would have you remember who you were," Mira said. "Before the gifts, before the accommodations, before the word practical became the word you used to cover the word wrong. I would have you remember the young man who told me on the night before his appointment that he would serve justice even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult, because that was when justice mattered most. That young man did not understand how the world works. That young man understood something more important than how the world works. He understood how it should work, and he believed he could be part of making it so." Harish closed his eyes. The rain drummed on the roof. The lamplight flickered. The food grew cold on the beautiful plates. "I have gone too far," he said. "Too many cases. Too many decisions. If I reverse the ruling on the farmland, the landowner will expose every accommodation I have ever made. Every gift, every favor. I will be ruined." "You are already ruined," Mira said, and her voice was not harsh, but it was honest, unflinchingly honest, with the clarity of someone who loves deeply enough to speak the truth, even when the truth is a blade. "You are ruined from the inside. The man I married is disappearing, Harish. Day by day, case by case, he is being replaced by someone I do not recognize. Someone who cannot eat his dinner because his body knows what his mind will not admit." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. Harish sat with it. He sat with the rain and the lamplight and the cold food and the weight on his chest that had been pressing down for years. And he felt for the first time how heavy it truly was. He had been carrying it so long that he had forgotten it was there. It had become part of him, as familiar as his own breathing, as constant as his heartbeat. But it was not part of him. It was something he had accumulated, decision by decision, compromise by compromise, like silt building up in a riverbed, slowly raising the bottom until the water could no longer flow. "There was a monk," Harish said slowly. "A traveling teacher. He came through the district last month. I saw him in the market, speaking to a small crowd. He was talking about karma, about how our actions shape the world we live in, not in some future life, but in this one, in every moment." What did he say? He said that a man who bends the truth eventually bends himself, that each small distortion changes the shape of the one who makes it, that after enough bending, the man no longer knows what straight looks like. He has lost his reference point. He has lost his center. Mira reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Have you lost your center, Harish?" He looked at her hand on his. Small, warm, real. The hand that had held his on their wedding day. The hand that had held their children when they were infants. The hand that had pressed cool cloths to his forehead when he was ill. A hand that had never taken a bribe or signed a false ruling or weighed justice on a scale tilted by silver. "I do not know where it is anymore," he said. "I know it was there once. I remember the feeling of it, the certainty, the clarity, like standing on solid ground. But the ground has shifted so many times, in so many small ways, that I no longer know where I am standing." "Then we must find it again," Mira said, "together." The rain continued through the night. Harish did not sleep. He lay beside Mira in the darkness and listened to the water falling and thought about the farmers on the eastern road. 11 children. The youngest was 3. He thought about the child's face, a face he had never seen, and he found that it was more real to him than the landowner's document, more real than the legal arguments, more real than any of the carefully constructed justifications that had carried him through 22 years of slow corrosion. He thought about the word Mira had used, ruined. He turned it over in his mind the way he turned legal terms, examining it from every angle. Ruined. Not financially, not professionally, not in any way that the world could see. Ruined in the way that matters most, from within. The structural failure of a life built on a foundation that had been compromised so many times that it could no longer bear the weight of a single honest thought. Before dawn, he rose. He dressed in the dark, quietly, so as not to wake Mira. He went downstairs and sat at his desk, where he kept his personal papers, and he began to write. He wrote for 3 hours. He wrote a detailed account of every accommodation he had made, every gift he had accepted, every case in which the outcome had been influenced by something other than evidence and law. He named names. He included dates, amounts, the nature of each gift, the details of each case. He spared no one, least of all himself. When he was done, the document was 11 pages long, 11 pages of slow corruption laid bare in his own careful handwriting. He read it through once. Then he sealed it and placed it in his desk. He was not ready to deliver it. Not yet. But the act of writing it had done something. It had taken the formless weight on his chest and given it shape, edges, dimensions. It was no longer an invisible pressure. It was a document. It was real. It existed outside of him, on paper, in ink, and it could be seen and read and understood. The weight did not disappear, but it shifted. It became, for the first time, something he was carrying by choice, rather than something that was crushing him without his knowledge. That morning, he went to the courthouse. He sat behind his bench. He looked at the schedule of cases for the day. The first case was a dispute between a potter and a merchant over payment for a delivery of goods. It was small, uncomplicated. No powerful interests were involved. No gifts had been offered. Harish listened to both sides. He examined the evidence. He applied the law with the precision and care that he had brought to his earliest cases before the compass needle had begun to drift. He ruled in favor of the potter. It was the correct decision. The evidence was clear. The merchant owed what the potter claimed, and the law supported that claim. It was a small case, an ordinary case. It would not be remembered by anyone except the potter and the merchant. But Harish felt something as he delivered the ruling, something he had not felt in years. A steadiness, a stillness in his chest where the weight usually pressed, as if, for just a moment, the ground beneath his feet had stopped shifting. It lasted only a moment. The next case was called, and it involved a wealthy family, and the familiar calculations began to stir in his mind, like sediment disturbed in still water. But the moment had been real. He had felt it, and he knew, with a certainty that went deeper than thought, that it was what he had been missing. He sought out the traveling monk. He found him in the garden of the town's small temple, sitting beneath a banyan tree whose roots hung down from its branches like curtains of living wood. The monk was mending his cloth bag, pushing a bone needle through the worn fabric with the slow patience of someone who has all the time in the world. Harish sat down on the ground nearby. He had never sat on the ground in his magistrate's robes. The earth was damp from the rain. He could feel the moisture seeping through the fine cloth. He sat anyway. "I know you," the monk said, without looking up from his mending. "You are the magistrate." "Yes. You look tired." "I am tired." The monk pulled the thread through the fabric, slow and even. "What kind of tired?" Harish considered the question. The kind that sleep does not fix. The monk nodded. That is the deepest kind. That is the tiredness of a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has only just realized they are carrying it. How did you know? Because you came here. People who are merely sleepy go to bed. People who are carrying something heavy go to temples and sit under trees and look for monks to talk to. It is a very old pattern. Despite everything, Harish almost smiled. I have done harm, he said, not with a sword or a fist, with a pen, with a gavel, with decisions that I made from behind a bench while wearing robes that were supposed to represent fairness and truth. Yes, the monk said, you say that as if you already knew. I live in this town. I have ears. People talk, especially about those who hold power over them. Your reputation is well known, magistrate. The question is not whether you have done harm. The question is what you intend to do about it. Harish pulled the sealed document from inside his robe. He held it in his hands, feeling its weight, which was far greater than 11 pages of paper should have been. I wrote this last night. It is a full accounting of every compromise decision I have made in 22 years. If I deliver it to the district governor, I will be removed from my position. I will likely face prosecution. I will lose everything. The monk set down his mending. He looked at the document, then at Harish, and if you do not deliver it, then I continue as I am, carrying this weight, making more compromises, bending further, until there is nothing left of the man I was. So your choice is between losing everything out there. The monk gestured toward the town beyond the temple walls, and losing everything in here. He touched his own chest, gently, over his heart. Yes. That is not a difficult choice, magistrate. It is a painful one, but it is not difficult. You already know what you must do. You knew it when you sat down to write. You knew it when you came here. You are not seeking advice. You are seeking courage. The banyan tree moved in the wind. Its hanging roots swayed like slow pendulums. A bird landed on a branch above them, settled its feathers, and began to sing. I am afraid, Harish said. Of course you are. Fear is the natural response to seeing clearly after a long time of not seeing. It is like stepping out of a dark room into sunlight. The brightness is painful. The eyes want to close. Everything in you wants to go back into the dark room where it was comfortable and familiar. But the dark room is not where you want to live, Harish. You know this. You have been living in it for 22 years, and it has made you ill. The monk I heard in the market, the one who spoke about karma, was that you? It was. You said that our actions shape us, that every choice we make either strengthens or weakens the structure of who we are. I said something like that, yes. The Buddha's teaching on karma is often misunderstood. People think karma is about what happens to you, about rewards and punishments delivered by some external force. But karma is really about what happens within you. Every action you take leaves a trace, a residue. It is called a samskara, an impression in the mind, like a footprint in soft earth. Over time, these impressions deepen into grooves. They become habits. They become tendencies. They become, if left unexamined, the shape of your character. He picked up his mending again, the needle moving through the cloth with quiet rhythm. When you accepted the first gift, it left a small impression, a small groove. The next time a similar situation arose, it was slightly easier to follow the same path. The groove was slightly deeper, and the next time, deeper still, until the groove became a channel, and the channel became a canyon, and you were moving through your life along a path that felt inevitable, but was, in fact, constructed by your own repeated choices. Can the grooves be undone? They can be replaced. You cannot erase a samskara, but you can create new ones, deeper ones, stronger ones. Every act of honesty, every moment of courage, every choice to do what is right rather than what is convenient, these create their own impressions, their own grooves. Over time, with patience and persistence, the new grooves become deeper than the old ones. The water finds a new path. It sounds like a long process. It is. The Buddha never promised quick results. He promised a path, a way of walking through life that leads, step by step, toward clarity and freedom. The steps are small. They are ordinary. They are nothing more than the simple, repeated choice to act with integrity rather than expedience. But small steps taken consistently cover great distances. Harish looked at the document in his hands. The seal, the careful handwriting inside, 22 years of small steps in the wrong direction, recorded in ink. "If I deliver this," he said, "I will cause harm to others as well. The merchants who gave the gifts, the landowners who benefited from my decisions, they will face consequences too." Yes, that is the nature of a web. When one thread is pulled, the entire structure moves. But consider this, the web already exists. The harm has already been done. The farmers have already lost their land. The potters and weavers and small traders have already been denied justice. The web is not neutral, Harish. It is a structure built to serve some at the expense of others. Pulling on the thread does not create harm. It reveals harm that was already there. A long silence followed. The bird above them sang on, indifferent to the weight of what was being discussed below. The wind moved through the hanging roots of the banyan tree, and they swayed and swayed, unhurried, patient, like the breath of the tree itself, slow and deep and ancient. "There is something else," Harish said. "Something that has been troubling me more than anything." "Tell me." "The farmers on the eastern road, the ones I ruled against yesterday, 11 children among them. The youngest is 3. I knew their claim was stronger. I knew the landowner's document was suspect, and I ruled against them anyway, because the landowner is powerful, and I was afraid of what he would do if I ruled against him. And now? Now I cannot stop thinking about the child, the 3-year-old, a child I have never seen. I keep imagining her face. I keep imagining what it will be like for her to grow up without the land her family has worked for 3 generations. To grow up knowing that the person who was supposed to protect her rights, the magistrate, the one whose entire purpose is to ensure that the law serves everyone equally, chose to protect the powerful instead." His voice broke slightly. Not dramatically, just a small fracture in the careful edifice of his speech, a crack through which something raw and honest seeped. The monk set down his mending entirely now. He turned to face Harish fully, and his eyes were kind. Not soft, not sentimental. Kind in the way that truth is kind, even when it hurts. "That child," the monk said, "is your karma made visible, not as punishment, as clarity. You asked me earlier whether the grooves can be undone. Here is your answer. They are undone by seeing, by truly seeing the consequences of what you have done, not in the abstract, not as numbers in a ledger or entries in a legal record, but as a child, a specific child, a child with a face you imagine because you cannot bear not to imagine it. What do I do? You know what to do. You have known since last night. Your wife told you. Your own body told you when it refused to eat. and now your heart is telling you, through the image of a child you have never met. Harish held the document. He felt its weight. And then he felt something else, a lightness, impossibly faint, like the first warmth of sunrise on a cold morning, touching just the surface, not yet reaching the depth, but present, real, promising more. "I will reverse the ruling," he said. "Tomorrow. I will reverse the ruling on the farmland, and I will deliver this document to the governor, and I will accept whatever comes." And how does that feel? Harish considered this. He searched inside himself for the familiar weight, the pressing on his chest, the tightness that had been his constant companion for years. It was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer pressing down. It was lifting. Slowly, like something heavy being raised by many hands, it was lifting. "It feels like the ground has stopped shifting," he said. "For the first time in years, I know where I am standing." The monk smiled, that same transforming smile, the one that softened every line of his weathered face and made his eyes shine with something that was not happiness exactly, but something deeper, something that included happiness, but went beyond it, into the territory of compassion, of understanding, of a peace that comes not from the absence of difficulty, but from the willingness to face it. "Then stand there," the monk said. "Stand exactly there, and take the next step from that place. Let us rest here. Let us rest in this moment between decision and action, between knowing what is right and doing it. This is the place where courage lives, not in the doing, which comes later and has its own momentum, but in the stillness before the doing, in the quiet space where a person sits with the full weight of what they are about to do and says yes. Feel your breath. Feel how it has continued through all of this, steady and patient, never asking you to be different than you are, never requiring anything of you except that you allow it. Your breath does not judge you. It does not keep a ledger of your actions. It simply sustains you, moment by moment, without condition. Let your body sink deeper now. Feel the heaviness of your limbs, the softness of your belly, the gentle closing of your mind, like a flower closing at dusk, not because the light has failed, but because rest is its own kind of blooming, its own kind of opening, an opening inward rather than outward, toward the quiet center where nothing is required and everything is enough. This story shows us how karma operates through the slow accumulation of compromised choices. Harish discovered that each small accommodation, each minor bending of truth, each gift accepted and favor granted, did not remain small. They accumulated, they compounded, they built, one upon another, like layers of sediment, until the foundation of his integrity was buried so deep that he could no longer find it. The Buddha taught that our character is not fixed. It is constructed moment by moment, choice by choice. The Pali term sila, often translated as morality or ethical conduct, literally refers to the habitual patterns of behavior that shape who we become. When those patterns are rooted in honesty and compassion, they create a character of integrity, a life that can bear its own weight. When those patterns are rooted in compromise and self-deception, they create something that looks solid from the outside, but is hollow within. Harish's karma was not the loss of his position or the threat of prosecution. His karma was the 22 years of living inside a self that he could no longer recognize. The weight on his chest, the inability to eat, the sleepless nights, the slow disappearance of the man his wife had married. These were not punishments delivered by an external force. They were the natural consequences of a life lived against its own deepest knowing. And yet, like Sura with her ledger, Harish found a beginning point, a single honest act, a document written in the dark hours of the morning, a decision to reverse a ruling, a willingness to lose everything external in order to recover something internal that no court could grant and no amount of wealth could purchase. When we make one honest choice after years of compromise, it does not erase the past, but it establishes a new direction. It creates a new groove, a new impression, a new samskara. And if we continue to walk in that direction, step by step, choice by choice, the new path eventually becomes deeper than the old one. The water finds a new way through. The compass needle, rusty and reluctant, begins to turn back toward true north. Let us breathe together now, in and out, like the tide that never tires, like the wind that moves through the banyan tree, touching every leaf, every root, every branch, and then moving on, carrying nothing, leaving nothing behind except the gentle memory of its passing. Feel your eyelids growing heavier. Feel the thoughts in your mind growing softer, less defined, like shapes in fog that blur and merge and dissolve. You do not need to hold on to them. You do not need to remember anything. The stories have done their work. The seeds have been planted. They rest now in the dark soil of your sleeping mind, where they will grow in their own time, in their own way, without any effort from you. There is one more story waiting. It comes to you now like the last light of evening, soft and golden and warm, touching everything gently before the darkness comes. Not the darkness of fear, the darkness of rest, the darkness that holds you like a mother holds a sleeping child, close and warm and safe. Let us explore this final story. There once lived a woman named Lila who made her living selling water. She lived in a dry region, a place where the land stretched flat and brown to the horizon, where the sky was enormous and empty and the color of bleached bone. Rain came rarely, and when it came, it was celebrated like the arrival of a beloved guest who had been away too long. Every drop was caught, channeled, stored. Every well was guarded. Every stream was watched and measured and shared according to agreements that were older than anyone could remember. Water in this place was not simply a commodity, it was life itself, and the people who controlled access to water controlled everything. Lila controlled a well. It was not a grand well. It was a simple hole in the ground, lined with stones, covered with a wooden lid to keep out dust and animals. But it was deep, and it was reliable, and it produced clean, sweet water even in the driest months when other wells turned brackish or ran dry altogether. The well had been in Lila's family for generations. Her great-grandmother had found it, or rather, as the family story went, the well had found her. She had been walking across the dry land, pregnant and thirsty, searching for a place to settle, when her foot broke through a thin crust of earth, and water bubbled up around her ankle. She had dug with her hands, widening the hole, and the water had risen to meet her, clear and cold and sweet. She had built her home beside it, and her daughter had lived there after her, and her daughter's daughter, and now, Lila. For most of those generations, the well had served the surrounding community. Lila's grandmother had charged nothing for the water. She had believed, as her mother and grandmother had believed before her, that water belonged to no one and everyone, that it was a gift from the earth, and to charge for a gift was to misunderstand the nature of gifts. Lila's mother had begun charging a small fee, not much, enough to maintain the well, to keep the stones in good repair, to replace the bucket and rope when they wore out. The community grumbled, but accepted it. The fee was fair. The water was essential. And Lila's mother used the money, most of it, for the well itself. But Lila saw something her mother had not. She saw that in a dry land, water was not just a necessity, it was leverage. And leverage, properly applied, could transform a woman who owned a well into a woman who owned much more. She began slowly. She raised the price of water by a small amount, then another small amount, then another. Each increase was modest enough that it did not provoke outrage, just as each step down a slope is gentle enough that the walker does not notice they are descending until they look back and see how far they have come. Within 5 years, Lila's water prices were 3 times what her mother had charged. Within 10 years, they were 5 times. The community complained. They held meetings. They sent delegations to Lila's door. She listened to them with a calm, pleasant expression, offered them tea, and explained that the costs of maintaining the well had increased, that the water table was dropping, that she was investing in improvements that would ensure the well's longevity for generations to come. Some of this was true. The water table was dropping. Maintenance costs had risen. But the prices Lila charged far exceeded any reasonable accounting of those costs. The difference between what the water cost and what Lila charged for it was pure profit, and that profit was substantial. She used it to buy land, dry, cheap land that no one else wanted, and then she used her control of the water to make that land valuable. She offered water at reduced rates to farmers who agreed to lease her land. She withheld water from farmers who competed with her tenants. She created a system in which access to the most basic necessity of life, the thing without which nothing could grow and no one could survive, was contingent upon compliance with her economic interests. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. And it worked. Within 15 years, Lila was the wealthiest person in the region. She owned more land than anyone else. She employed more workers. She controlled not just the well, but the irrigation channels that fed the surrounding farms, channels she had built with her profits, channels that she could open or close at will. The people of the region depended on her completely. They resented her. They feared her. And they needed her, which is the most dangerous of all combinations, because need without love breeds a particular kind of bitterness that grows quietly, underground, like the roots of a tree that will eventually crack the foundation of a house. Lila was aware of the resentment. She was not a fool. She could feel it in the marketplace, in the way conversations paused when she approached, in the way eyes shifted and smiles tightened. She could feel it in the formal courtesy with which people addressed her, the kind of courtesy that is a mask for something else entirely. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself that respect born of necessity was still respect, that wealth was its own justification, that her great-grandmother had found the well, and therefore the water was hers by right of inheritance, and what she did with her inheritance was her own business. She told herself many things, and for a long time, the things she told herself were louder than the things the world was trying to tell her. But the well was changing. It happened so gradually that Lila did not notice at first. The water level, which had always been reliable, began to drop. Not dramatically, not in a way that caused immediate alarm, just a slow, steady lowering, like the ebbing of a tide that does not fully return. She sent workers to deepen the well. They dug further into the earth, past the stones her great-grandmother had laid. past the layers of clay and gravel, into the deeper rock where the water moved in ancient channels carved over millennia. They found water, but less than before, and it tasted different, slightly mineral, slightly bitter, as if the earth itself were offering something reluctantly from deeper reserves that were not meant to be drawn upon so heavily or so often. Lila ignored the signs. She increased her prices again to compensate for the reduced flow. She rationed water to those who could not pay, which meant the poorest families, the ones who had always been most dependent on the well, received less. Their gardens withered, their animals grew thin, their children drank water from the irrigation ditches, muddy and warm, and not entirely clean. A sickness came that summer. It moved through the poorest households first, as sickness always does, finding the weakest bodies, the ones already diminished by insufficient water and insufficient food. Children fell ill, elders fell ill. The healer in the nearest village was overwhelmed. Word reached Lila. She received it in her fine house, sitting in a room cooled by wet cloth hung across the windows, a luxury made possible by the very water she was denying to others. She sent a small amount of clean water to the affected families. Not enough. A gesture. The kind of gesture that looks like generosity from a distance, but reveals itself, up close, as something closer to conscience management. Enough to say she had helped. Not enough to actually help. The sickness passed, as sicknesses do, leaving behind it a handful of small graves and a deepened bitterness that settled over the community like dust after a dry wind. And still, the well level dropped. One morning, Lila lowered her bucket and heard a sound she had never heard before. The scrape of wood against dry stone. She pulled the bucket up. It was empty. She lowered it again, letting out more rope. Again, the scrape. Again, empty. She stood at the edge of her well, the well that had sustained her family for 4 generations, the well that had made her wealthy, the well that she had drawn from and drawn from and drawn from without ever considering that it might have a bottom, and she stared into the darkness below. The well was dry. She could not quite comprehend it. It was like being told that the sun would not rise. The well had always been there. The water had always been there. It was the one constant in her life, the foundation upon which everything else had been built. And now it was gone. She sent for workers. They dug deeper. They hit solid rock. No water. They tried drilling. The rock resisted. They worked for 3 days in the heat, and at the end of 3 days, they stood at the bottom of a dry hole and looked up at Lila's face framed against the white sky above them, and they shook their heads. The well was finished. News traveled quickly in a dry land. By midday, everyone knew. The well that had served the region for 4 generations had run dry. Lila's well, the source of her wealth, her power, her leverage over every family in the area. Gone. Lila sat beside the empty well. She sat on the stone rim that her great-grandmother had built, and she looked at the dry land around her, at the fields that depended on her irrigation channels, channels that would carry nothing now, at the houses of the families who depended on her water, families who would need to find another source or leave. She sat there through the afternoon. The sun moved across the enormous sky. The shadows shifted. A hot wind blew across the flat brown land, carrying dust and the smell of dry earth, and something else. Something that might have been the last breath of water evaporating from deep underground, rising through cracks in the rock, dispersing into the air, becoming invisible, becoming nothing, becoming part of the sky. A figure appeared on the road, walking slowly, unhurried, a cloth bag over one shoulder, bare feet raising small clouds of dust with each step. A monk, the same traveling teacher who had sat on Sura's bench, who had spoken with Harish beneath the banyan tree, who had arrived, as he always seemed to arrive, at the moment when arrival was most needed. He came to the well. He looked at Lila sitting on the rim. He looked at the rope coiled beside her, the empty bucket, the dark hole that led to nothing. He sat down on the ground, cross-legged, in the dust. "You are the one they call the water seller," he said. "I was," Lila said. "Now I am the woman with an empty well. Tell me about your great-grandmother." Lila looked at him. It was not the question she expected. She expected judgment. She expected a lecture about greed. She expected the same cold satisfaction that she imagined everyone in the community was feeling right now. The satisfaction of watching the powerful brought low. "She found this well," Lila said. "Or it found her. She was walking, pregnant and thirsty, and the water rose to meet her. That is the family story." "The water rose to meet her," the monk repeated. "It came up. She did not have to dig for it. It offered itself." "Yes." "And what did she do with it?" "She shared it. She never charged for it. She believed water was a gift." "And what did you do with it?" The question was simple. The answer sat in Lila's throat like a stone. "I sold it," she said. "I charged more and more. I used it to control people. I used it to buy land. I turned a gift into a weapon." The monk nodded slowly. "The water rose to meet your great-grandmother because she needed it. It offered itself freely. And for 3 generations, it continued to flow. Your grandmother shared it freely, and it flowed. Your mother charged fairly, and it flowed. You charged without restraint, and it stopped," Lila whispered. "I am not saying the earth punished you. Wells dry for many reasons. The water table drops. The underground channels shift. These are natural processes. But consider this. You drew from the well without limit. You expanded your irrigation channels. You watered more and more land. You sold more and more water. You took more and more from the source. You never asked whether the source could sustain what you were taking. You never considered that the water, like any living system, had limits. I thought it would always be there. Yes, that is what we always think about the things we take for granted. We think they will always be there. The water, the soil, the forest, the people who serve us. We take and take and take, and we are shocked when the giving stops. But giving has a limit. Even the earth has a limit. Even patience has a limit. Even love has a limit when it is taken from, but never replenished. Lila looked at the empty well, at the stones her great-grandmother had placed with her own hands, at the worn groove in the rim where the rope had rubbed for 100 years, pulling up water, pulling up life, pulling up the gift that the earth had offered to a thirsty woman walking across a dry land. "What do I do now?" she asked. "What would your great-grandmother do?" Lila closed her eyes. The wind moved across her face, dry and warm. She could feel the sun on her skin. She could feel the stone beneath her, solid but no longer alive with the vibration of deep water moving far below. She would walk, Lila said. She would walk until she found water again, and when she found it, she would share it. Then you have your answer. The silence that followed was vast as the dry land, as vast as the sky above it, a silence that held everything and demanded nothing. This story shows us the simplest truth of karma. What we take without giving back eventually runs dry. Lila discovered that a gift exploited becomes a gift withdrawn, not through punishment, but through depletion. The earth gave freely until it had nothing left to give. The Buddha taught that generosity, dana, is not merely a virtue. It is the natural way of things. Water flows, air moves. The sun gives light without asking payment. When we align ourselves with this flow, we are sustained. When we dam it, hoard it, sell it, we may profit for a time, but we cut ourselves off from the very current that feeds us. We have traveled far together tonight. We met Ratan, who took from the forest until the forest came to his door. We met Vikram, who drained the land and the people until both were exhausted. We met Sura, who wove a web of debt and found herself trapped within it. We met Harish, who bent the truth until he could no longer stand straight. And we met Lila, who sold the gift until the gift was gone. Each of them discovered the same truth. Karma is not punishment. It is reflection. What we send into the world returns to us, not because the universe is keeping score, but because we are part of the world we are shaping. We cannot harm the web without harming ourselves. We cannot drain the well without going thirsty. Let this settle now. Let it rest in you like water resting in deep earth. You do not need to hold it. You do not need to understand it fully. It will find its own level. It will do its quiet work. Feel your body now. Heavy, warm, still. Feel your shoulders releasing the last of their tension. Feel your jaw softening. Feel the small muscles around your eyes letting go, smoothing, becoming still. Your breath moves like water, in and out, slow as a river through a wide valley, gentle as rain on soft earth. There is nothing left to carry. The stories are complete. The teachings have been given. The seeds are planted. They rest in darkness now, in the warm, fertile darkness of your sleeping mind, where they will grow without effort, without worry, without any need for you to tend them. Simply rest. Simply breathe. Simply be here, in this moment, which is enough, which has always been enough. You are the sky. The thoughts are clouds. Let them drift. You are the water. The ripples are fading. Let them still. You are here. You are held. You are home. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us at Sleepy Monk.